Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Miranda was agitated and excited. She had been busy in the kitchen since morning. In the middle of the day, her refrigerator was no longer able to hold the numerous appetizers and salads. On the stove, there was a huge pot of roast from the oven. Came intoxicating aromas of such a pie with berry filling. The woman was still circling between the table and the cupboard, figuring out what else she could create from the food at her disposal. Despite the abundance of dishes, Miranda felt that she had prepared too little food and the guests would go hungry. And the guests were expected to be important. A few days ago, Miranda and Sebastian Jenkins' daughter accepted a marriage proposal from her fiancé David for the city. And today, Jenkins was scheduled to meet David's out-of-town parents, and Miranda was terribly afraid of making a mess of things in front of her new in-laws. She looked thoughtfully into the refrigerator, wondering if she should add some raw slices to the existing slices. When Sebastian's husband entered the kitchen, assessing the situation, he walked over to his wife, put his arm around her and gently pushed her away from the stock of provisions. "Miranda, calm down," he said affectionately. "You've already cooked enough to feed a company of soldiers. The guests won't eat it. They won't even be able to taste it." Do you think the woman was hesitant to go to the refrigerator? "I keep thinking there's something missing. Everything is enough, and even with a surplus," reassured her husband. "You'll see for yourself. Then we'll finish it for 2 more days, as if you're not happy about it." On the business of Miranda's husband, he laughed. "Glad, of course. A kitchen full of goodies. Of course I'm glad. I see you're sweet and sour, and the meat's confused. Why are you trying so hard?" "Me and Kevin are nervous," my wife confessed frankly. "What if we don't like each other? What if something goes wrong? The first impression is the strongest. David's parents won't like some little thing. That's it. And we have to communicate with them later about the wedding, and in general with relatives to be friends. And there's a big age difference between us. Maybe we won't hit it off." Sebastian and Miranda married late after 30, and their daughter was born even closer to 40 years old. Now the daughter was 22 years old, and the parents were approaching 60 years. In the family of the future son-in-law, everything was exactly the opposite. For city elders played a wedding almost immediately after school, and a year later gave birth to a son. They weren't even 40 yet, and their future daughter-in-law's parents could act as their parents at the same time. Miranda, it was very unsettling. "Don't worry prematurely," Sebastian reassured his wife. "Don't you think we don't have many young acquaintances? A lot, and we communicate with all of them somehow. At the very least, apply your professional skills to go for the city. We're fascinated by all native. Extinguishes the oven and let's go. We'll have a little rest. We'll have some tea. Worse? No. For the guests than a tired and withdrawn hostess. They'll be here in 300 hours. That'll give you time to catch your breath and take a shower. And I'll set the table while you're here. Yeah, Lisa will help. Don't worry, we'll make it perfect." "Oh, my heart is racing." Miranda sighed. "And if something goes wrong, Lisa will be upset too." Lisa was the name of the Jenkins daughter, the bride-to-be, which is what all the fuss was about. Actually, Miranda wanted to name her daughter Lisa, and Sebastian was fine with it. But as often happens, the young mother had no time to deal with the paperwork for the baby, and this duty was entrusted to the newly minted father. But here's the trouble. On the day when Sebastian was going to visit the registry office, he was attacked by some insidious virus. In the morning, the man felt only a slight malaise, but in the middle of the day he had a fever, ran a very bad runny nose, covered his throat. Somehow Jenkins waited until work was over. He had asked his bosses to leave early so that he could get to the registry office before closing time. Overcoming weakness, he got to the office, but because of a runny nose, he pronounced his daughter's name inaudibly. At the end of the day, the woman who was working on the birth certificate did not ask him to repeat the name, but wrote it down as she heard it. Sebastian himself was in agony and fever. Neither did he reread the documents issued to him, just took the papers and went to his parents. He reasoned that it was not worth bringing a contagion into a house where a newborn child lived. He was given a week's sick leave. A few days later, when the weakness receded, and Sebastian, taking advantage of his free time, as a decent parent, took copies of the documents to the clinic, to the milk kitchen, to the accounting department of the institute where he and Miranda worked, and to some other organizations that had to be notified of the baby's arrival. This is how Miranda found out that her daughter's name was Robert and not Lisa, only 10 days after the birth certificate was issued. And that document had already been seen by so many organizations that it would have been too much of a hassle to redo it. The woman grumbled at Sebastian, of course, for a long time. But the name of her daughter got used too unexpectedly, quickly. Especially her mother-in-law, having learned about the mishap, said with a laugh. And that she even suits this name. Look how thin and flexible she is. Lisa is Lisa. Jenkins was indeed born skinny and thin. No counter and no tugging. There was no infant resemblance at all. But the flexibility and firmness was there from birth. And that's what my mother-in-law accurately pointed out. Miranda had to put a lot of effort into swaddling the baby. Lisa turned from diapers, described from diapers, and even using the decay of legs, somehow expressed. This is how she grew up slender, thin, flexible, and willful. But despite the girl's unruly character, her mother loved her very much and worried about her daughter. Almost as much as in her childhood. That's why she was worried now before meeting her future relatives. She wanted everything to go off without a hitch. Good, at least with David, future son-in-law Jenkins, were familiar with a long time ago. We cannot worry unnecessarily. Who did the bloodline decide to marry? David was a positive guy in every sense, and Miranda and Sebastian liked him very much. Young people met right after graduation. David and his classmates celebrated the awarding of diplomas in the same restaurant as Robert fellow students. The girl studied at the Philfac, and David in a technical university at the Faculty of Road Maintenance. Girls and men quickly took notice of each other. They got reacquainted and soon mingled. This evening formed several strong, stable couples, and Robert and David were among them. True, with the wedding they lasted longer than the rest of the fellow students. Robert wanted to find a good and steady job before the wedding. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming a journalist. But in her time, she did not get enough points in the profile faculty, so she applied for the philological faculty. Starting from the second year, the girl tried herself as a freelance correspondent in different city and regional editions. But quite quickly it became clear that the text was not cramped. She wanted to illustrate her words at least with photos, or better, with video. That's the only way, the girl thought. It is possible to penetrate the modern news consumer, to convey to him what you really want to say. Therefore, having received a diploma, the girl began to storm television. It took her 6 months to get on a local TV channel, and another 6 months to get a foothold there and become in demand. Even a relatively popular correspondent, whose stories viewers waited for, watched with attention, and discussed later both in kitchens and on social networks. All the while, David, immediately after graduation, having got a job in one of the city's construction trusts, courted the rising star of the screen and waited for her consent to the wedding. And then he did. Lisa came running home an hour before the guests arrived. She brought the drinks, helped set the table, shared the abundance and variety of treats. The out-of-towners showed up on time. And half an hour after the start of the feast, Miranda realized that she was worried for nothing. Kelly and John, David's parents, turned out to be very nice people, calm, friendly, cheerful. Kelly was a housewife. She called it still herself. And in between, taking care of the house, John was engaged in entrepreneurship, kept a small manufacturing company, but did not want to talk in detail about his work. Give at least here to rest from business. The man joked back. Make friends with the parents of the future son-in-law managed to quickly enough, and the difference in age did not prevent rapprochement. So Zagorodny Sr. quickly agreed that they will not impose their wedding format on the children. Let the celebration will be held the way the young people want. I think it's the best option, Kelly said. I remember my own wedding with horror. Mom and Dad said since we all pay for everything, we decide who to invite and where to party. And what did we get? A room full of some strange older relatives for the ransom. In the best rustic traditions, music old Toastmaster with silly contests. I wasn't even allowed to choose a dress like I wanted in the registry office. It was some kind of cake. In white rose-colored glasses, I still cannot look at the photos. Yeah, backed up John. It was a tiring event, but it's never too late to get it right. Miranda smiled softly. Now in the registry office, you can order a simple registration. Not real, but solemn and even away. At least in nature, at the beach at home. And have a new wedding just the way you want it. Yes, Sebastian confirmed. We did that for our 25th wedding anniversary. The couple wanted to be romantic. So we did it again. We rented a Miranda dress. They organized a tuxedo for me. And we renewed our vows at the wedding palace. And you know, I was skeptical at first, but at the end of it, I got emotional. I think even more than I did at my real wedding, he laughed. John hummed skeptically, but Kelly was fascinated by the idea, and she began to ask with curiosity and interest how to organize everything, how much the ceremony cost, what are the requirements. Slightly frightened by his wife's enthusiasm, Zagorodny tried to restrain her. Kelly, wait. While we now have a wedding of children is more important. How about we do both ceremonies on the same day? Lisa immediately suggested it. That would be so great, so romantic. And again, the concept. Intergenerational. Continuity within the family. It's like nothing anyone's ever done before. The discussion went to a new level. The women loved the idea. David, as the groom, supported the thread in everything. But the older men quickly got tired of the enthusiastic plans of the group and retired to the balcony for a smoke. Having returned from a smoke break, they began to change plates on the table and finally brought hot food from the kitchen. Only with this they managed to interrupt the conversation and direct it in a new direction. Everything is so delicious, Jean said delightedly. I've never had a roast like this before. Miranda, are you a cook by any chance? No, are you? Laughed the venerable Miranda. I'm an honored pensioner. Cooking is a hobby. I used to work in a completely different field. I'm a psychologist, and not just a psychologist, but a doctor of psychology, emphasized Sebastian. With a meaningful thumbs up. I've never been able to reach such heights. Sebastian and I worked at the same institute, Miranda explained. Only he stopped at the master's thesis and abandoned his doctoral thesis. But I had the patience. Wait, John interrupted the woman. What do you mean? Were there psychologists in the Soviet Union? It seemed to me that they only proliferated in the last 10 to 15 years. The Jenkins looked at each other and laughed. Even Lisa laughed heartily at her future father-in-law's delusions. You're right about something, John. From the media, I said Miranda. Active popularization of psychology in our country really started only in the early '90s, but this science itself is not the first 10 years or even 100 years old. And in the Soviet Union it certainly was. Only in those years there was more demand for social psychology. The course was to work with the team on the compatibility of its participants. There were psychologists at schools, of course, at factories, at large organizations, but their activities were aimed at strengthening the corporate spirit, as they would say nowadays. And for the most part, specialists working in psychoneurological dispensaries were engaged in solving personal problems and detecting diseases, and they were of little value. I'd worked there for a while too. I was interested in interaction with specific people. I went into this profession wanting to help people, but then I saw the attitude to such help and went into science. How did you find out about the profession in the first place if it wasn't on the radar? Kelly asked. Why did it suddenly occur to you to become a psychologist? After all, you can help people in many places. "Oh, that's a very interesting story," David suddenly cut in. "It's not even a story of career guidance, it's a family story." "Tell it, Miranda." Well, the short story was Jenkins, but her future son-in-law interrupted her. "No, don't. Just tell it short, like they told me. So you already know it all by heart." Sebastian mocked the young man. "So what?" David objected. "I like the way Miranda tells it. And the story is interesting. And Mom and Dad will understand everything about you. But now we're intrigued." John said insistently, "Miranda, after such publicity you can't help telling." In fact, John did not want the conversation to return to the discussion of the wedding and the decorative registration of his wife. For the sake of it, he was willing to listen even to a family tale, though he didn't really like such stories. But he liked the wedding ceremony even less, and he didn't want to participate in such a reenactment. John expected that the story would distract his wife from the idea given at the beginning of the evening, and then she would forget about it. So he enthusiastically began to persuade his future relative to tell the story. However, Miranda especially did not resist. After a roast with tea and cake, she began her story. Miranda Kendall. In the future, Jenkins was born in a small village Putilova 200 kilometers from the regional center. She was the youngest child in the family. Her parents had 2 older sons and a daughter. And like all younger children, Miranda grew up spoiled and loved. Although there was nothing to spoil the girl, they lived modestly. Christopher, Miranda's father, worked on the collective farm as a tractor driver. Mother Cindy Larkins worked there as a milkmaid. Simple, quiet, hard-working people. They received an average wage, kept a large farm. And Badja was chewed up at home. However, a simple countryman could be called only Christopher. With Cindy in it, all was a little more interesting. Christopher was a man of the countryside. Miranda's mother had been born on the road and had lived her entire childhood there with her parents and numerous siblings. Miranda Larkin's grandfather was chairman of the Putilov collective farm. Grandmother Clara worked there as a bookkeeper. Daughter Cindy was born to them just after the war. After about a year, grandfather and grandmother tried to give education to all their children. They encouraged them to read books and be interested in various sciences. Good studies at school. This approach paid off. Cindy's 2 older sisters had already graduated from universities in the city and were slowly making their way into the world. The older brothers were excellent in school. They were predicted a bright future. And Cindy herself studied diligently and was regularly praised by teachers. The girl planned to become a doctor, but fate ordered otherwise. When Cindy was 10 years old, her parents were arrested. Her father was accused of embezzlement and misappropriation of collective farm property. Mother was taken with him for company. Reasoned that the chairman of the collective farm could steal state property with the complicity of the bookkeeper. In fact, there was no embezzlement. There were only inconvenient nationality of the father and an anonymous letter that came on him to the district administration. And then the punitive machine spun very quickly. One evening, 3 children of school children, Cindy and her 2 brothers, were left without parents. Where were the adults taken away? Where to look for them? How long will they serve their sentence? Neither the younger children nor their older sisters, who had traveled from the city to arrange custody, were able to find out. Much later, the older sister told Cindy that the alleged embezzlement was just a pretext for arrest. And at the trial, the prosecutors went all out, portraying the parents as enemies of Soviet power, Zionists, terrorists, and God knows who else, simply because of their nationality. As a child, from the conversations of her elders, Cindy realized that everything was the fault of her parents' positions. Everything is the fault of her parents' positions in a small collective farm. The chairman of the accountant is practically the upper class, the elite. There is always someone who is jealous and wants to live in the light. So, to live a quiet life, you have to keep your head down. So reasoned the 10-year-old girl, especially if you come from a Jewish family. And if your parents were arrested and taken to the camps, it's better to live modestly, but quietly and peacefully, than to make your way into the world, risking your life. No, Cindy didn't drop out. She graduated from high school with honors and even turned from Cindy to Cindy Larkins. But she did not stop reading books and interested in science and medicine, in particular, subscribing to various general education magazines, watching educational programs on television when it appeared in the house. She was a woman, intelligent, erudite, finely sensitive with excellent artistic taste, but having finished 10 years of school, did not go to the city to enter the institute, and got a job in her native collective farm on the simplest and most inconspicuous job. So she spent her whole life in it, refusing even to be promoted to foreman of milkmaids. It seemed to her that even such an insignificant career advancement would bring danger to her and her family. Cindy's older brothers and sisters left for cities and towns. The girl stayed in her native village. For a while she lived in her parents' house. But soon after graduation, Cindy married Christopher Kendall and moved into a hut, which was allocated to him by the collective farm. The girl for a long time rejected the advances of the visiting guy. It even came to the point that she hid from him in the backyard. But Christopher was persistent and continued to pursue Cindy persistently and methodically. In the end, Cindy summoned him for a conversation and told him about her biography, about her arrested parents. Should you ruin your life by associating with the daughter of an enemy of the people? She asked, having finished the story. So it is necessary. Angrily, replied Christopher. We have a son is not responsible for the father. I forgot. And a daughter is not responsible for her father either. And knowing where these enemies of the people come from. A month later they got married, and a few years later the young built their own house and moved there with their first child. And the house of their beloved parents was empty and decrepit by the time of the birth of their youngest daughter, Miranda. From it remained almost one hulk towering among the weeds and frightening the children, the failing windows. Cindy sometimes took her daughter there. The two of them would walk around the property, jumping on the floor balcony inside the ruins. And Cindy Larkins would tell how things used to be here, and Miranda would listen and memorize. The girl got into the habit of visiting the old house once a week, of spending some time in it talking about the weathered walls, about her life. It seemed to her that her grandparents were invisibly present among these ruins, listening to her and delighted granddaughters' stories. Miranda decided to visit the abandoned house twice a week and strictly adhered to the schedule. Only in winter did she sometimes miss visits in the worst of the frost. The year the girl turned 10, the winter was warm and snowy. One January day, the girl sat in the ruins until almost dusk, telling at home how she and her relatives celebrated the new year. She caught up only when a snowstorm started outside. Miranda, she realized, had to get out, or the path to the street was barely trampled. She'd notice in no time. Heavily, shuffling her feet through the snow, the girl got out on the shriveled porch of the house and saw that a man was sitting on the Leningrad. Looking closer, she realized that the alien had been here for a long time. Small drifts of snow had managed to gather on his shoulders and top. Miranda was wary, but she realized she had nowhere to go. She would have to leave the lot anyway. She couldn't just sit around. She moved forward with determination, reasoned that if a man tried to attack her, she'd raise a ruckus. A dozen meters from the family ruins stood an apartment building across the street, another. Would anyone hear her screams? Barely past the lot. The path was already partially snowed over. The girl equaled the fence and found herself a couple steps away from the stranger. Looking closer, Miranda realized that on the remnants of the fence sat a woman, almost an old woman. She was dressed in some inconceivable rags. Her head was covered with a scarf. The old woman's face was unfamiliar, and it was puzzling. The village, though it had grown in recent years, but it was still small. All the inhabitants knew each other in one way or another, but this woman Miranda had never seen. She could have sworn it. The old woman sat motionless and paid no attention to the girl, didn't even turn her head in her direction. She did not seem to see Miranda. The girl began to look at the stranger and suddenly saw that tears were flowing down the alien's cheeks. "Grandmother, why are you crying?" loudly asked Miranda. The old woman did not answer, and it seemed she did not even hear that she was being addressed. The girl repeated the question and then began to shake the old woman by the shoulders. "You're all right. What's wrong? Why are you sitting here?" inquired she. "You're freezing. We should go home. Would you like me to walk you home?" Miranda's efforts were successful. The stranger finally snapped out of her trance and saw the girl. Hearing what she was being told, the old woman only sighed and shook her head. "There's no place for me to go, sweetheart," she said hoarsely, as if in a chicken voice. "I have no home." "But where did you come from?" Miranda wondered. "From afar, sweetheart," said the old woman, still monotonous, like a broken record. "I'll never make it back." How could it be? The girl was seriously upset. For some reason, a strange woman had caught her eye. "You can't just sit here, can you? It'll be night soon. The blizzard's coming. You're freezing to death." The old woman just nodded her head. The prospect of freezing to death didn't seem to bother her at all. "Come with me," Miranda said decisively. "Come and visit us. My parents are good, don't be afraid. And the house is big enough for you to sleep here." And then decide what to do next. She demandingly pulled the stranger by the arm. "Come on, let's go, or he'll notice the road. We'll never make it. My goodness, you've turned into a snowdrift." The girl managed to push the old woman out of the way, rising heavily from the debris of the fence. The stranger followed her. Miranda held the old woman's hand tightly, afraid that she would suddenly change her mind or simply get lost in the snow swirls. They reached the house after dark. Cindy Larkins was peering out the window and, seeing her daughter, jumped out on the porch. "Where they carry you grumpily," she grumbled. I kept my eyes peering. "It's nighttime. The storm is raging. And you are schlepped somewhere." The woman noticed the guest, which her daughter persistently pulled behind her all, and remained silent, then hesitantly spoke. "Hello, Mom. It's Grandma who's lost," Miranda explained. "I brought her to us. She says she doesn't know where her home is or where to go. Let her wait here tonight. We can't let her go out in this weather. We can't." The mother agreed and turned to the old woman and invited her to come in, please. "Here, develop here. You can hang your coat here." Cindy Larkins helped the alien to undress. Under the coat turned out to be worn another one, and under it a glass fungus sole of strange color. It seemed never to have been cleaned once in its life when all the outer clothes were hoisted on a hanger. The old woman appeared skinny, if not skinny. The shawl from her head, she was reeling, and Cindy Larkins had evidently taken to fiddling, fitting both his topcoat and Valenki. By the stove, Mama was pestering Miranda. It was Granny who said she came from far away. "So she's not from our village. I don't know her. See if you recognize her. Maybe she's a local after all. They say old people sometimes forget where they live." "It happens," the woman responded. She took the old woman to the corner between the stove and the table, the warmest place in the kitchen, seated her on a chair covered with a soft thread, leaned over the guest, looked into her face, and suddenly froze, scrutinizing his features. For several minutes, the two women, old and young, gazing at each other. Miranda became subdued, but looked at them both. She was surprised to hear her mother suddenly ask the old woman in a stern voice, "Laura?" The alien nodded in response and, in turn, asked the landlady Cindy a question. "Cindy Larkins is now Kendall," mumbled the woman and cried. Hugging her guest tightly and resting her nose on the top of her head, the old woman picked up Cindy Larkins, but with both hands she pushed her nose into her chest and, from the sounds of it, cried too. Miranda watched the scene with all her eyes. I think she even forgot to blink. The door slammed behind her. Christopher's father entered the house. After assessing the situation, he loudly asked Cindy what was going on. Yes, Cindy, the sane woman, raised her face at her husband, flooded with tears. To Miranda's surprise, it was completely happy. "Meet Christopher," she said. "This is your mother-in-law, Clara. Sarah is my mother." Hugs she did not ponder. And the old woman, though she turned to her son-in-law, continued to hold on to her daughter with both hands. Christopher was quick to recognize the situation. "Pleased to meet you," he said politely to the guest. "So why are you standing there? Let's get the table ready. Grandma, you go, we need to feed. See, mother is busy. Let's manage." He shook the girl by the shoulder, and only then Miranda was able to shake off her surprised stupor and began to organize in the kitchen. Slar was released from the colony 2 years ago due to the end of his sentence. None of her relatives knew about it, and there was no one to inform her of the release. During the first year of her imprisonment, Slaga strictly forbade her older children to write to her. She was afraid that such correspondence could affect their reputation in a bad way and hinder their future life. After that, she stopped replying to the letters of her daughters and sons, and later she was transferred several times from one camp to another, from place to place. And when her youngest daughter, Cindy, grew old enough to have the right to search for her mother, it was impossible to find her. Cindy sent inquiries to various authorities for several years, but it seems that the bureaucrats and the penal system themselves were confused by the paperwork and were unable to give the young woman a clear answer. I did not know my children's 3 new addresses, and my own old home address, during the time in captivity, have forgotten. She only remembered the name of the village where she had once lived with her husband. That's where she decided to go. The camp authorities issued a certificate of release and some road from the colony to the village, past which the railroad passed. The woman hitched a ride. It was not far to go, about 20 kilometers away. At the station, she spent a long time finding out from the cashier how to get to the village, or rather to the center of the region in which the village was located. She and the cashier figured out the route. But here's the trouble. There were no tickets for passing trains. They said to wait. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. She had nothing to do, so she decided to walk around the village near the station. The village was small, not very well maintained. There were no sights or amenities, but the woman didn't care. She was delighted by the very possibility of walking anywhere, without having to answer to anyone and without fear of breaking any rules. She wandered through the streets and alleys, looking at houses and yards, rubbing the backs of stray dogs. Sit down to rest on benches by the fences. It was September. Trees in golden foliage looked incredibly beautiful. The weather was warm and the air was fresh. Clara lost track of time, and when she found herself on the outskirts of the village, she was surprised to notice that it was beginning to get dark. The old woman moved back towards the station, hoping to spend the night at the tiny station. But at that moment, someone hit her hard on the back of the head. Clara fell to the ground and lost consciousness. She woke up in complete darkness and found herself lying in the storm. I tried to get up, but the back of my head hurt treacherously. My head was spinning. My throat was receding, nausea sticking from the fence. The woman sank back down into the thicket, examined herself under the giving grasses, arms, legs intact. Her head was not pierced. No blood, but thickets all around. The knot of Kaz is not rich yet. Not there either. I'm angry. What kind of robber went for old rags and a loaf of bread? Nearly took his life. Who do you think you're robbing? You can tell from a mile away that she's an ex-convict. They see them regularly in the village. They've learned to recognize them by now. But then Clara noticed that she wasn't wearing a trench coat and groped her body and clothes. The woman realized not only her poor belongings were stolen, the certificate of release and the little money she had were gone too. And that was a problem. She couldn't leave without her papers. The only way to legally buy a ticket from here was to show her ID. She couldn't get a passport either. And she was supposed to register with the police within a certain period of time, get a residence permit, and settle some bureaucratic formalities. If she doesn't do that, she'll go back to jail. Shit, I don't want to do that. Even the loss of money didn't bother him as much as the loss of the certificate. But what to do? Where to go? With a complaint of robbery, the woman could not understand. In fact, she couldn't even run. When she tried to stand upright, she began to feel dizzy. Consciousness threatened to leave her long-suffering head. Little by little, her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, and Clara could see a small barn nearby behind a low fence. The woman crawled toward it, climbing over the fence, which, fortunately, was no higher than her knee, climbed inside and entrenched herself in Navalny in the construction of the hayloft. "I'll give it up for a while," she thought, "and then I'll decide how to be, not to lie under the fence." With this thought, Revue fell asleep. She was awakened by the owner of the barn, who noticed the intrusion into his territory. He was a sturdy old man. He swore at first, but not in a mean way. "What are you doing with that fence?" "My flower has fallen." He got angry. "You could have knocked on the house, asked to spend the night like a human being. Wouldn't he have let you in? We are all human beings. We all treat your brother with understanding." However, having heard about the alarm about what had happened, the muzhik stopped grumbling. He brought his suddenly and guests water and a crust of bread, and himself disappeared, to return soon with a policeman and a local paramedic. The police representative questioned Riva in detail about what had happened to her during the night. He examined the territory, asked for written explanations from the old woman and from the owner of the plot. The paramedic examined the old woman and diagnosed her with a concussion. At least a couple weeks of bed rest was recommended. The man, who introduced himself as Stephen, carried her into the house, arranged her on a shell bed in the kitchen, told her to rest and gain strength. "Anyway, until your documents are resolved, you will not be able to go anywhere," he explained. Stephen said that Clara was not the first in their village to be attacked. For a year now there have been some kind of seagulls in the neighborhood, hunting for ex-convicts. To recognize them among the locals was simple criminals Bodarowatel, or people who came out of the camp and poked them intimidated, and sometimes just attacked from the back and publicized, as it happened with Lika, and then robbed afterward. Why? The old woman was perplexed. What good would they do to us? There's nothing to take from us. No property, not even pennies on the road. "Oh, you silly Clara," Stephen lamented. "And the documents are a certificate of release. That's their main prey. And that's what they're after. And what do they do with certificates? Do they get free train tickets?" I continued to wonder. "Do they need those tickets?" Waved Stephen away. "You understand that the most important thing in the certificate is that you can get a real passport with it. No check will not dig up. And with this passport you can do so much with it, or sell it for good money. And these crooks know exactly who needs such a document. They correct the certificates in Ashen as they need them. They change the year of birth, change the photo, glue it to these papers at the passport office. They look very closely, especially if the passport office is far from the camp. So they go far away. And then they use the stolen documents to get passports. That's what our district officer told me," he explained. "These bastards have been hanging around here for a long time, but they can't catch them. They're running all over the neighborhood. And with their traveling, it's all over the country." The effects of the concussion took a long time to wear off. Her weakness became her constant companion. She stayed at Stephen's for over a month. During this time in the local militia, you gave the woman a new certificate, and she received a passport here in the village. You had to go to the permanent place of residence to get the documents. There was no time to go there. The legal deadline was coming to an end. Stephen persuaded the old woman to winter at his place. The man lived alone. His parents had died long ago. He had no wife and children. His brothers and sisters were partly scattered across the country and partly taken away by the war. He was glad to be alive. He was glad to have a soul in the house. He reasoned that it was worth to gain strength and recover before a long trip. Besides, the winter promised cold, and there were no warm clothes. Until the end of May, she lived in the house of her savior, kept house, cooked food. She worked part-time as a cleaner in the village Novi Club, in order to save at least a little money for the road to her native village. When summer came, she got ready to go. She felt better, noticeably stronger. She felt less dizzy. And what about the occasional memory lapse? She tried to ignore that. She said goodbye warmly to Stephen. The man had packed her a substantial bag of provisions for the journey and wanted to give her some money, but she decided that her own savings would suffice. The journey was supposed to take a couple of weeks, but somehow it took almost a year and a half. How come? Leek didn't finish listening. Fell asleep exhausted by the events of the evening. Already later she mentioned that at some point she forgot where she was going, and when she came to her senses, she found herself at an unfamiliar station with no provisions and almost no money. She traveled part of the way on foot. Sometimes she caught a hitchhiker, rode as a hare between the train cars, asked for alms, asked for lodging in villages, slept at the stations, on benches, wherever she had to. And when after all the ordeals she finally reached Putilov and saw her native house in ruins, she almost lost her mind. It became clear that the long journey had been made in vain. There were no relatives. There was nowhere to bow one's head. Of course, one could walk through the village, look for people who remembered her, stay with them. But the old woman was afraid. She still didn't know which of the villagers had written that unfortunate anonymous letter about her and Larkins. But just in case, she trusted no one else. From fatigue and confusion, the old woman fell into a kind of mental trance. In this state, she sat on the cook fence of her former home for over an hour. She would surely have frozen there if Miranda hadn't noticed her. Destiny. The adults alone spoke with significance. It's all mysterious. Others echoed them. I thought nothing was fate. There was no mysticism and mystery in her meeting with her grandmother. It's just that for so many years she'd been calling her home. With her constant stories, with her presence in her house, Grandma just couldn't help but hear. So it's all right. The Kendalls had set up Slaga in a passageway room. The rest of the rooms in the house were occupied. Daughter and son-in-law fixed up the old lady. Did the department grant her a pension? By spring, Clara recovered from her long journey and joined the life of the family. Cindy Larkins clearly thanked all the gods in the world every day for bringing her mother back. Miranda adored her grandmother, even though she was not a sugary character. The old lady was her own free-spirited, risk-taking self, but her relatives forgave her for it. Everyone realized that if she had been God's dandelion, she simply would not have survived either in the camp or after it. Cindy wrote to her sisters and brothers about her mother's return, and all summer long the Kendall family had a pilgrimage of guests, of joyful guests. Was that summer happy, filled with the brightest emotions? But with the onset of fall, a serious problem arose in the house. She began to scream in her sleep, talking loudly with interlocutors unknown to anyone. "Give me my bread, or all the assholes are pulling," she shrieked in the middle of the night. "The certificate. My certificate. Where is it? They'll put me back in camp without it. I don't want to." The scream woke up the family. The next night, everything hurts inside. The old woman read in the night, without thinking, "The eye of the bishop. Why such a punishment? It's like I'm being torn to pieces," she called at the top of her voice. "Fooled him. Where are you dragging him? You bastards." These cries woke up the whole house. At first, they were repeated about once a week, but by midwinter, Clara was getting the whole family out of bed every day. She herself remembered nothing of the bad dreams or her screams, but would only shut up when her daughter or grandchildren pulled her out of her sleep. The old woman was embarrassed by the trouble she caused her loved ones, but she couldn't help herself. Sleeping pills and sedatives that the village paramedic offered did not help. After them, on the contrary, it became more difficult to wake up the old woman during her nightmares. She should be treated in a psychoneurological dispensary, thoughtfully said the local medic Cindy. At these words exploded. "Do you want me to send my own mother to a mental institution? That's the last thing we need." But nevertheless, Kendall's life was becoming increasingly difficult. The family stopped getting enough sleep. Grandma's seizures could recur several times a night, and there was no rest in between. Christopher and Cindy became irritable. They often complained of fatigue. No wonder, because after restless nights they had to go to work. Yes, it's not easy shifting papers in a warm office. And doing physical labor. Miranda and her older brother also felt the impact of not having enough to eat, although it was a little easier for them as children than for adults. It went on like this until the spring. By May, Cindy Larkins was ready, if not to accept the paramedic's suggestion that the old woman be treated in a mental hospital, then at least to discuss it further. She and her husband were completely exhausted and didn't know what to do. Miranda, hearing the conversation of the elders, realized that the grandmother would not approve of the treatment. Moreover, she would be angry at her daughter for such a decision. And then Miranda would be angry with her. The girl suggested to her mother to move the old woman to her room. She lived in the farthest corner of the house from her parents' bedroom and hoped that from there she would not hear her scream so much. "She'll give you no peace at all," Cindy Larkins lamented. "So what?" Miranda waved it off. "It's summer. I don't have to get up for school during the day. At least you and Daddy will have a rest." Was the girl so convincing, Mother? Too exhausted. But soon the old woman's relocation took place. The first few nights the girl swore, jumping out of bed, hearing another scream. However, after a few days she thought that it was possible to try to cope with the grandmother after a nightmare sleep and forced booth. The old lady fell asleep for a long time. Noise contrived, complaining about the fact that it disturbs her granddaughter. It's exhausting even more than her shouting. And Miranda decided to come up with a way to soothe her without waking her from sleep. At first, the girl simply approached her grandmother, barely hearing her voice, stroked her head, and on her hands quietly and affectionately coaxed her. "It's a dream, Grandma," she repeated patiently. "It's not real. It's all right. You are at home. No one is hurting you. Mommy and Daddy are there for you. They'll protect you." But the old woman just didn't hear her granddaughter. And then Miranda devised another plan. The next night in the next bed, there were cries. "That's my bread, give it back, to whom I say, you shameful thief." Miranda sneaked up on her grandmother and spoke persuasively. "Here's your bread, girl. Nobody's taking it away from you. I took it to salt you with salt, it tastes better. Here." The girl repeated it several times, and suddenly Clara heard her. "It tastes better with salt," she agreed. "Thank you. Forgive me, I was scared." The old woman turned sideways and fell asleep peacefully. Miranda froze enthusiastically at her bedside. Had it really worked? The rest of the night passed surprisingly quietly. In the morning, the lyricist rose awake before noon. She wanted to tell her grandmother about the night's events, but with some sixth sense she realized that it was not worth it. Instead, she asked her grandmother, "You sometimes yell about bread at night. Did someone really take it away from you?" "True," the old woman replied reluctantly. "I had just been brought to the first camp in Barak, and there was a woman who tried to take my rations. I attacked her. Where did the anger come from? I don't know." My grandmother was silent, and then she added, "But you know, I remember now that she gave me back my piece. She said she wanted to salt it." Miranda nodded her head. She didn't know how the story of the stolen harmonica really ended, but she suspected that the outcome was not as peaceful as her grandmother saw it today. She remembered the phrase about salt from a dream in which her granddaughter had intervened. The girl decided to continue her experiments, but not only to appease her grandmother, but also out of research interest. The next night, barely beyond the dream, she began to wail pitifully. "Everything hurts, like it's tearing me to pieces from the inside." Miranda immediately crept over to her bedside and spoke closer. "Get some rest. Here is the most modern medicine for you. You take it. Everything will go away. Everything will stop hurting. Good for you." As if letting go, muttered the grandmother a moment after the girl's words. "Of course," confirmed Miranda. "The pain will go away now. You sleep. You'll wake up and forget everything." Soon the old woman stopped moaning. She sang and even curled up under the blanket. Miranda realized that the nightmare had receded. Once again, the grandmother slept peacefully until morning. But the next day, her granddaughter did not ask her about the nightmare. Determined not to awaken her memories, Miranda took the experiment seriously. She kept a notebook in which she noted how often she talked to Clara in her sleep, how quickly she calmed down, whether the attack was repeated, and soon noticed from her notes that the nightmares in which she managed to wedge in repeated less and less often, and after a few months and disappeared altogether. This encouraged the young explorer even more, in her for a flicker of hope that it will be possible to completely cure her grandmother of night attacks. And soon this hope was confirmed. Nightmares began to visit her less and less often. Sometimes Miranda slept through the night without her screams. Sometimes you only had to get up to her once a night. But there was no more like the beginning of last fall, when Slaga read every 2 o'clock. Miranda considered it her small victory. Not always the girl managed to calm the old woman with the first time to pick up the words. For example, when Clara started calling for her husband and screaming to let him go, she usually had to be woken up. "Miranda, I tried telling her your husband wasn't taking him anywhere." But the old woman didn't believe it. She'd spent too many years without her husband. She remembered the separation too well. The phrase, "We'll figure it all out and bring your husband back." No one of Slava's age would have believed such a statement from the law enforcement officers. Miranda went through the phrases. I wrote down the unsuccessful ones. Finally, she guessed to address her grandmother as if on behalf of her grandfather and promise her that he would surely survive, and they would meet again. Soon after this discovery, Clara's most agonizing nightmare gradually let her go. Before the start of the school year, Cindy Larkin suggested that her daughter move her grandmother from her bedroom back into the pass-through room, but Miranda refused. She reported to her mother that Clara had become a much more restful sleeper. Cindy had noted this herself, although her daughter's room was away from the bedroom. At first, she often heard the usual night noises from there, but by the end of the summer, such episodes became fewer and fewer. After rejection, she was glad several times to the door of her room at night, hearing her mother's voice and eavesdropping on what was going on. Finding out what was going on, Cindy Larkins pondered the situation and went to hold a consultation with the local paramedic. He approved of Miranda's methodology. The doctor talked to the girl, read her diary of observations of her grandmother, asked about the results, and afterwards he praised Miranda fervently, saying that if she continued her experiment, she would be able to cure her grandmother completely. He explained for a long time how and why the method invented by Miranda works. He said some wise words the girl did not understand even half of it, but she did. She's on the right track. A year later, a peaceful sleep returned to Kendall's house. She stopped screaming at night, and if she had a nightmare, the family knew how to calm her down quickly. They didn't tell the grandmother herself. They just tried to treat her as kindly as possible. Miranda could be proud of herself, but she had no time for that. She judged the paramedic for a while to explain to her how things had turned out in simple words. To the medic's credit, he did not dismiss the curious girl and managed to lay out his assumptions for her. In addition, he recommended several popular scientific publications from which you can understand how the human psyche works. The subject fascinated Miranda, and she plunged headlong into the study of psychology, first on the basics, and then more seriously. By the end of school, the girl already knew exactly what she wanted to devote her life to and did not retreat from her decision. All this long story Miranda told the parents of her future son-in-law. Of course, it was much shorter. Although David constantly intervened in the narration, clarified the details, drew the listener's attention to the details. He himself had heard this story not for the first time and liked it very much. He admired the ingenuity of little Miranda, the selflessness with which she took to help her grandmother, the patience and warmth of heart she showed during her impromptu healing session. "I would never have thought of this at 11 years old," the young man exclaimed. Among other things, David was struck by the very history of the Kendall family. Born in the mid-90s, he had not seen the Soviet Union, and about repressions, camps, persecutions on ethnic grounds. He knew the KGB and NKVD only through excerpts from old movies and history books. It was strange for the young boy to encounter people who had actually seen and experienced all this. He was especially surprised that these people were not stale old men, but quite cheerful and adequate people. His future father-in-law and mother-in-law, Kelly and John. Miranda's story impressed him too. After it, they had a long conversation about the vicissitudes of fate, about how childhood events influenced the choice of profession, about the Soviet era, about human kindness. The discussion of the wedding was not just on the second, but on the 10th plan. But the conversation turned out to be sincere and heartfelt, and by feelings Jenkins brought the future relatives closer despite their difference in age, education, and social status. After all, that was the purpose of the joint dinner. So at least, reasoned Miranda. Parted at 0 o'clock for the city elders left by cab. David stayed at the bride's apartment. They are sunny, sent the parents to bed, and themselves cleaned the table, went through the dishes, tidied up the living room and kitchen. The guy thought that he was obliged to help the future relatives, at least in this, since he was not allowed to help in the organization of the dinner, which was held for him, and therefore he did not know that, returning home, his mother said to her husband, "How do you like that? John, we're going to have a hereditary Jewess in our family, and from a family with a criminal record." I was hoping David would find a better match. "Okay," John responded to you. He didn't pick anything. He's in love with this thread and her family wholeheartedly. Do you care if she's Jewish or Turkish with a criminal record or a spotless one? They have plenty of money, pensions for doctors of sciences, a decent apartment. You've seen for yourself what a great party they are in material terms. And you and I don't need anything else. We decided to get married in 6 months in September. I didn't want beautiful fall photos under the dress. David was not against it, and parents amicably decided not to hinder the newlyweds and not to impose their ideas about the celebration. While the bride and groom were saving money for the party, outfits, treats, and a bachelorette party. It was decided long ago that after the wedding, the young people will live at Jenkins and save money for the down payment on the mortgage. And they should have thought about their careers. Both boys had little seniority, couldn't afford to borrow much money from the bank, and the salaries were not such that painlessly pay off the loan for housing. Miranda and Sebastian were completely satisfied with this solution. They found it reasonable in their large apartment with 3 isolated rooms. There was enough space for both parents and the young family. But the out-of-towners didn't like the idea for some reason. But openly, they did not express their protests. John, in mail conversations with Sebastian, he periodically complained that the son does not act according to the rules. They said that a man should bring his wife to his house and not move to her. Jenkins on these speeches only guffawed. It's all prejudice and long out of date. John came in, on the other hand. But a young family, come to think of it, they want to make some noise sometimes. But during this very time, and there are parents behind the wall, you have to admit, it's embarrassing. Imagine yourself in such a situation and will never have grandchildren. You've been here, John. Sebastian wondered. From the thread and the room to our half of the apartment. How noisy do you have to be for us to hear, unless you yell into a microphone? Would the guests want to invite us to a party? I guess, John. People need a place to gather with their friends. Or they'll just sit up late watching TV, and you'll be noisy at 0 o'clock. We're fine, smiled Jenkins. Yeah, agreed, was John. I remember Miranda wasn't used to being kept up at night by the noise from the in-laws. Sebastian gave his companion a serious look, raised an eyebrow questioningly. I mean that she could endure the inconvenience for a long time for the sake of the people closest to her and not say anything to them about it. Tactfully, I'm a woman, John quickly mouthed and curtailed the subject. There was no need to quarrel with the future in-laws yet. Kelly was more subtle. Over a cup of tea, she could complain to Miranda. David, the other day, my boy was frying cutlets. I come in. Oh my goodness. The whole kitchen smoky. The stove's got grease on the coffee. Splashes on the table, flour scattered. and he sits in front of a mountain of cutlets and says I'm treating my mom. And he doesn't notice what he's turned the kitchen into. You have to be such a Bezrukov. Grown-ups are already on the torture. You're with him, Miranda. Not scared. He was joking. Kelly, you haven't seen what goes on in our kitchen. After Sebastian's fish fry. The man is incorrigible. Kelly nodded, but by the next meeting, she'd start all over again, all over me. Would you be comfortable living with Slovaks? After all, a stranger in the house, and besides, a young man just so from the morning from the bedroom in a nightgown will not jump out of the bedroom. I have never been in the habit of jumping out of the bedroom unclothed, Miranda objected softly. David is no stranger to us. He stayed overnight, or on weekends more than once. We've never been inconvenienced. Don't worry, Kelly. No worries at all. It's one thing to have him as a guest, and quite another to have him as a permanent resident. And that you're getting tired of this topic being mooted. You guys can't have a life. You yourself understand it perfectly well. And to rent an apartment, it is not rational at their incomes that the newlyweds settled for the city could not be out of the question. Everyone understood that. The David family lived in a two-room adjoining Khrushchevka, where the guy owned a passageway room. When he was a teenager, he tried to persuade his father to make repairs and isolate his room. But John quickly explained to his son the unreality of this idea. Expensive, messy, troublesome. The room would be cramped. The apartment will be blocked by a dark, long corridor, which is not used rationally. In addition, because of this, redevelopment will reduce the living area of their Khrushchevka, which will lead to a drop in its value. In short, unprofitable from all sides. David then reconciled, blocked off part of the room with a closet, thus allocating himself a personal space, and about the repair shut up. Later, getting acquainted with Robert, he sometimes regretted that he did not show insistence to bring the girl in a separate room. Although tiny, it still goes anywhere, but in the country behind the closet is simply impossible. The current hints of David's parents only annoyed, especially since for the city expressed their thoughts not only Jenkins Sr., but also Netta. For example, one day Kelly took the future daughter-in-law to the cat show, and their threads looked at one of the kittens, a red and fluffy Maine Coon. The girl more than half an hour stood near his cage, admiring and pleasing. So let's buy him, Kelly suggested. I'll add to you if you don't have enough. You can't, sighed Lisa. Dad's allergic to cats. Then get the breeder's contacts and buy one after the wedding, Kelly suggested. And then, as if she'd come to her senses, she added, "Oh, you'll be living with your parents anyway. If only you had your own apartment." Slowly, Kelly and John put their future daughters-in-law into the family's heads. The idea that the young ones needed their own place. Eventually, Miranda got fed up with it. She summoned the town's spouses for a talk, and she called David and Robert and her husband. "Kelly, John," she began, "we've all noticed that you don't like the prospect of David living in our apartment after the wedding. Let's discuss this situation once and for all. First, let's admit to each other that we have no alternatives. The young people will not be able to live with you. This will inevitably lead to domestic conflicts. We are not in a position to buy an apartment. We don't have that kind of money. We do not intend to exchange our existing housing. You, as far as I understand, you also do not have the financial means to evict David. Otherwise, you would have done it a long time ago." John shook his head. "No," he admitted, "except for a down payment. We could scrape together a studio of some kind." "Not a studio," Lisa resented. "If you're going to mess with the mortgage, then buy a full-fledged apartment, albeit one room these to fly. Where is the room combined with the kitchen? Well, we'd probably add something to your money for a down payment, but we don't have a lot of money. I warn you, we'll get a one-room Khrushchevka somewhere in the suburbs, and the guys are still more comfortable living in the center. It's not far to work, and there's all the infrastructure. They can't rent an apartment and save for a mortgage at the same time. So, I believe, moving in with us, David, is the only sensible decision. especially since the children made it themselves. We expect it won't be for long. David cut in. 5 years at the most. But that's me calculating the worst-case scenarios. Moreover, said Sebastian, we will help by providing housing and not requiring the kids to contribute to the household expenses, so as not to slow down the rate of savings. But I would object to the expenses, said David. I don't like to be a freeloader, and we will discuss it. If necessary, Miranda responded immediately. That's what the situation looks like so far. Maybe you see some other ways to solve it that the four of us don't see. She turned to Kelly with John, for the townspeople looked at each other, shrugged confusedly. Not yet, it seemed, Kelly said. In that case, let's consider it a done deal, Jenkins summarized. And please don't start any more conversations about how inconvenient it is for anyone or how wrong it is in general. It's tedious and uncomfortable, Smith's words added, and almost with glee. Kelly and John had to agree before the wedding. They kept their heads down and didn't broach the subject of bridal real estate again. All the more did not remember the idea to organize on the day of their marriage. For Kelly and John, the future mother-in-law was only in favor, but he himself categorically did not want a second ceremony. Realizing that the man cannot change his mind, Lisa said, well, and the hell with it, come up with something more interesting. And came up with as a bachelorette party arranged all the close women, including Miranda and Kelly, masked photo shoot in wedding dresses. For this event, she invited several makeup artists and hairdressers, conspired with a rental salon to provide outfits and space, and with a nearby restaurant. About a small buffet. The ladies were a little shy at first, but the champagne abundance of outfits around did their job. Soon, everyone invited, with pleasure and excitement, tried on dresses, posed for photographers, tested unusual makeup. The party turned out very girlish and yet romantic. No, she was pleased. And Kelly later told her in confidence that even re-registration with her husband would not have given her so much joy and pleasure. In short, there was no time to discuss where the new family would live. However, John had prepared a surprise for the wedding dinner. The dinner was modest. Only the young people and their parents celebrated the marriage. With friends, David and Robert decided the next day, and immediately after the registry office and photo shoot went with their relatives to a cozy restaurant. David, in the city of excellent cuisine and service of extra class. When the turn came to handing out gifts, the new father-in-law solemnly rose from his seat and said, guys, I decided as a gift to buy you an apartment. Here are the documents. He held out to the newlyweds a thin folder. I thought, he continued, that my savings are enough either for a ready-made studio or a 2-bedroom. But for the construction phase, I mean the down payment. Of course, I wouldn't be able to afford the whole thing. But so far my earnings are stable, and one good contract should be coming up soon. So I got in touch with a real estate developer. And now we have a 2-room apartment near the center. True, the house is still at the foundation stage, but the builder is reliable. I checked. It's scheduled for completion in 2 years. They're giving it to you with renovation. Just move in and live. Once it's built, now we'll register the house with you. In the meantime, the loan is on me, and I'll pay. It's a gift after all. The news made a lot of noise around the table. Robert and her husband and parents went to see the house under construction a couple of days later. The new building was indeed very well located in the so-called quiet center. The neighborhood was green and cozy. Not far from the house were stores of basic necessities. Kindergarten, school. There was a prospective apartment in the next block. Sebastian grinned, and with grandchildren will be comfortable to live. And the manager who accompanied them would also confirm. We have in the project provides wheelchairs on the first floor, ramps at each porch, and a great playground in a closed courtyard. And the whole territory is under video surveillance. You can even let one child go for a walk and not worry about his safety. Jenkins' senior impression, and nodded approvingly. She didn't let this information pass her ears. She looked at the floor plans with curiosity, looked for her future apartment on the floor plan. And when she found it, It seems that she immediately began to arrange the furniture there in her imagination. A representative of the developer took the families to a neighboring building, recently commissioned by his company. Some of the apartments in it were still empty, and it was possible to get inside and look at the renovation by the builders, and generally assess the quality of housing. After this trip, even David, who had previously been skeptical about his father's gift, felt grateful to John and began to dream of moving. "Great," Sebastian exclaimed on the way home. "Here he was being a friend to you, and here's a royal gift for you guys. But for now, he's not splurging too much." "It's cool," Miranda noticed. "At the foundation stage, these apartments are cheap enough. Not a penny, of course. But for our 3-bedroom, we can get 3 2-bedrooms like this. He'll splurge later when he starts paying off the loan." I suggested to my father that we pay off the loan. David responded immediately, but he refused. He said it was his gift. It was the best we could do. "What is this? Us taking over the mortgage after we move in? When the apartment's built, when it's finished, my dad'll transfer it to us. We'll live and pay for it then. Until then, he's on his own." "Is it a big payment?" asked Sebastian, and hearing the amount, whistled delightedly. "Almost my entire pension," shocked the matchmaker. "He says that as long as his income allows," David explained. "Yes, he is also counting on some contract with Europe, which will supposedly provide him and my mom with income for eternity. I don't know much about his business affairs," finished the young man, a little embarrassed. "You don't need it. You have your own work to do," Miranda reassured her son-in-law. "But God willing, it will all work out. Basically, nothing has changed yet," Lisa said thoughtfully. "We are still living with you and still saving money. Only now it's not for the mortgage, but for renovation and furniture. Let's see how this developer shows himself. Although it will be a pity, of course, if something is delayed." That was that. David settled down in Robert's room, moved his things and computer, and set up his own workspace. He really got along with his wife's parents without any problems. Of course, there were some little things in terms of everyday life, which had to get used to anew. But it was perceived and mighty with his father-in-law as an inevitable stage of lapping, and did not cause violent emotions. In general, the two families coexisted in one apartment quite peacefully. On weekdays, they did not see each other very often. The young ones worked late, and after work they usually went to some events like concerts in bars, theater performances, or just visiting friends. The older generation had their own thing going on. Sebastian continued to work part-time at his institute, and on weekends he went fishing, including in winter. Julia counseled privately and worked with students, helping them write academic papers and conducting research. Officially, the Jenkins seniors were retired, but they could not imagine life without work. Once a month, the families would stop by the construction site and were pleased to see that the house where their apartment would be located was coming up. The construction was strictly on schedule, and in some aspects even ahead of schedule. And David and Robert gradually got used to the idea that they would live here. Little by little they got acquainted with the neighborhood, planned the situation in the future housing. Even Robert's parents had already accepted the idea and were discussing their children's plans with no less enthusiasm than they were. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Moreover, John made regular installments on the loan to the builder. Thus passed about half a year. Towards spring, the Jenkins noticed that John had become nervous and anxious. Sebastian called him for a conversation and learned that the conclusion of the contract with European partners, on which the man had pinned so much hope, for some reason stalled. "We'll have to tighten our belts, it seems," sighed the matchmaker. "With the current customer, we have a contract ends in May. Will he renew it or not? We don't know yet, and it's not a very convenient customer. In general, he will get discounts from us when renewing. How's that sound? And where will I get them from? We're already working with him at almost cost price. I also bought some equipment specifically for the Europeans. The money is spent, and the equipment is idle." They didn't know what John Jenkins was doing. Even David couldn't explain to them the specifics of his father's company, some kind of small production. But what kind of manufacturing? What does it produce and who does it sell to? No one knew. John himself, starting to talk about the work, began to rush with obscure terms, from which the interlocutors quickly tired. So his explanations did not add clarity. But Sebastian understood the holy financial crisis. "John, with the mortgage you pull so far or help?" he asked. "Pulled until God willing," the man responded. However, a couple months later, John came to Jenkins and said to Sebastian, "Listen, Saint, help. I can't take any more credit. I scraped together the last pennies for the last payment, and I don't know where to get money for the next one. I work alone. You know, Kelly, we're all looking out for ourselves. She's no help at all." "What are you talking about, John?" Sebastian exclaimed. "I'll help, of course. We're not strangers. And the apartment is being built not only for your son, but also for my daughter. Tell me where to transfer and by what date. I'll do it." "Thanks, my brother-in-law helped me out. By next month I'll have it up and running," John promised. "Oh, and don't tell the kids, please. It's embarrassing. He said it was a small gift for the wedding, and now he's left with nothing." "I won't tell," Sebastian reassured his relative. "I'm not going to tell you, I guess. I have a stash that my wife doesn't know about, just for such occasions, so don't worry. We'll save your reputation." John thanked Jenkins profusely. He promised it was just a one-time thing. By the next installment, everything would be fine. But it turned out that Sebastian paid for the apartment under construction for the next year. John returned his money to him only twice, and then, not completely discouraged, and with the crisis in his company, David and Robert said nothing. The guys continued to travel regularly to the construction site and plan the move. The building where their future apartment was located was already erected, and they were excitedly measuring the floor among the still bare concrete walls and deciding where to put the sofa, where to place the table, and in which corner a floor lamp would look better. Jenkins didn't want to deprive them of this joy, but Miranda had to confess her collusion with the saint. There is no wife who doesn't know about her spouse's stash, even if it's kept in a bank account and managed solely from a private office. Miranda noticed that her husband began to look more often than usual into the internet bank, which he had not used before, that by a certain day of the month he began to check the status of his cards, to transfer something somewhere. She didn't bother with suspicions. She just asked directly. Sebastian, who was not used to having secrets from his wife, gave in at once. Jenkins listened to the story, thought a little, and said thoughtfully, "God forbid that everything should be all right," and ended with an incomprehensible phrase for her husband: "Good that you transfer the money from your account, not cash." However, Sebastian did not pay attention to this remark. A few more months passed before John showed up at Jenkins with a penitent look. He arrived on a weekend when the entire population of the apartment and the younger and older ones were home. Gathering everyone in the kitchen, he began to get upset. "Came to apologize, comrades. The contract I had so hoped for is obviously no more. With old clients, my contracts are over. All in all, my firm is almost bankrupt. I've decided to sell it for a blood loss. I'm sorry, guys, I know I promised you, but I'm not holding out." "How do you mean sell it?" David was surprised. "What do you mean?" "Directly," John said sadly. "I'll put it up for sale under an assignment agreement, so sell it to us. Lisa found it right away. We will continue to pay off the loan." "And what will I use to pay off my work debts?" John sighed. "I can't charge you for the apartment. I'll take it from an outside buyer, especially since I already have one in mind. But I'm sorry, guys, I know you were hoping. But I promise you, as soon as things get better, I'll buy you a better apartment than this one." Robert and David and Sebastian. There was a lot of noise for a while, suggesting options. Miranda was silent, scrutinizing the matchmaker. Sebastian came out to escort John to the entrance and asked in a low voice, "Hey, matchmaker, and my money, which I gave for the loan, Will you give back from the sale? We'll decide, said the city quickly. I'm in a hurry. I'm running. A longing settled in the Jenkins apartment. The young people were upset and discouraged. They were too used to thinking of this new building as their own. They had too many plans for it. Sebastian was worried about the money he'd spent for nothing. John, after apologizing, hadn't visited in over a month, and he was unavailable by phone. Kelly made long conversations, but did not report on her husband's affairs, claiming that she knew nothing about them. One evening, after making sure the children were firmly entrenched in their room, Miranda called her husband into the kitchen and handed him some printouts. What are these? Sebastian asked, puzzled. It's data from the Rosary Store website, she explained. John, our faraway sold. Even before he repented to us, he came the day before. He didn't mention the debts. He didn't say anything to you. When I asked him, he said we'll figure it out. That's all. Sebastian studied the documents, then shook his head in confusion. He's a fraud, our matchmaker, sadly, Miranda summarized. Why did you jump right in? Sebastian, the man's in a financial crisis. What's in it for him? He embarrassed himself. He embarrassed himself in front of his kids. He doesn't give a damn about his kids or ours. Miranda was angry. And Sebastian's benefit is very simple and transparent. He bought this apartment at the foundation stage 1.5 years ago. Since then, and the dollar rate has grown, and the situation on the real estate market has changed, and the apartment has gone up. I saw it myself. The house is almost ready. Now this 2-bedroom is $6 million more expensive than when he bought it. I checked. Look at this. John took out a loan with no down payment. There was a developer's promotion, and he only made 5 6-month payments. So he didn't spend more than $200,000. And now he sold the apartment, paid off the rest of the loan, and got about $4 million. That's a nice profit. In 1.5 years with that kind of investment, it's a good profit, Sebastian agreed. But what makes you think it's fraud? That he thought it all out in advance and acted, as they say, in self-interest. Yes, if only because he hasn't paid you back yet. Even though he has the money from the sale, Miranda replied reasonably. It's been a month, by the way. And he hasn't even shown his face to us. Everyone hides during that time. Apparently, he's not going to give anything back. What was the point of the whole show to promise the kids an apartment? He could have just bought it for himself, waited for it to go up in value and sold it. Sebastian, but you're like a little kid, really. The woman didn't know whether to be angry or upset. Without the show, he'd have to pay the mortgage himself. So most of his mortgage was paid for. You figure you're paying for your daughter's house. Sebastian didn't have time to answer. The door opened and David came into the kitchen. David, I'm sorry, he said, slightly embarrassed, but more wary. I overheard part of your conversation. Sebastian, is that right? You paid the mortgage instead of your father. Jenkins nodded. And he didn't pay you back? The boy kept asking. Sebastian shook his head. David lowered his eyes. He was quiet for a moment. We have some savings, he said. Finally, how much does your father owe you? I can pay you back that money. There are savings and well, grumbled Sebastian. Let it sit. It'll come in handy. A son can't answer for his father, can he? The man winked mockingly at his son-in-law. And I'll pay for my mistakes myself. Maybe I'll still be able to persuade John. Let me talk to him myself, David suggested. It's easier for me. I don't think he's hiding from me. Talk if you want to, Miranda nodded. I don't think so. Are you really going to convince him of anything? That money wasn't good for us, Sebastian explained. I mean, it wasn't the last money we gave him. No offense, it was just a rainy day fund. You know, age. You gotta be prepared for all sorts of illnesses and stuff. But it's a shame. David, you know. I understand, nodded the guy. I'm offended and ashamed too. I thought you were going to call me out of the house after all this, and Robert. I'll talk to my dad. He finished and stalked out of the kitchen. John really wasn't hiding from his son, but he laughed at his requests to return the money he paid Jenkins. "What money are you talking about?" He was surprised. "I didn't borrow from him. I didn't give him any receipts. I didn't promise to pay him back. He offered to help me when he found out about my difficulties. So I took him up on it. So he thought he was paying the rent for me and the thread." The boy objected. "But what did he think?" stretched John mockingly. "Yes, I promised you that apartment, but I overdid it. I didn't calculate my possibilities. But it was registered to me, so I'm the owner. I bought it when I wanted, sold it when I wanted. What's your beef? So you bought it with someone else's money?" David was outraged. "And why someone else's?" "Explain," shook his head father. "A relative helped me. A close person. Do you consider him a stranger too? You live in his house, don't you? Aren't you ashamed? So pay back your relative." David tried his best to speak calmly, not reacting to his father's taunts. "And you prove that it was a debt?" John grinned. "There was no debt. It was voluntary contributions. That was nice of the family. There was no debt." At last the men shouted at each other, and their conversation turned into a real quarrel. David achieved nothing for his father-in-law, but firmly promised his father that until Sebastian got his money back, he would not communicate with his father. A great loss. John followed the offspring. That night he called Jenkins and expressed his displeasure. "What are you, a matchmaker? You're turning my son against me," he said reproachfully. "I thought you were in my position. I agree to wait while I sort out my finances, and you not only started to beat your pennies out of me, but also David against me. I didn't expect that kind of meanness." The conversation was on speakerphone. Sebastian was fiddling with a word at the moment of the call, and his hands were dirty. David, hearing his father's complaints, was lazy. "How can you have a conscience?" he shouted into the phone. "You're a liar and a cheat. We'll sue you in court, you say," snorted John. "Son against father. But sue over laughing lawyers." And he disconnected. "Uncle Sebastian, I think you should really file a complaint against him," David said, in a passionate voice. "He won't give the money back in kind." "David, what's the point of all this squabbling?" Jenkins said sadly. "You and your father are going to get in trouble. Honestly, I don't want anything to do with him." After that, he left David with a thread to play on our nerves. "Lied to your eyes. Deprived you of your savings. He thought I might lose my beloved wife after such tricks. What are you doing with Miranda? You won't let me in the door. Like hell you wouldn't." He didn't care. "I don't want anything to do with him." After that. "Don't get hot, David, don't get hot," Sebastian reassured him. Not sure what else to say, but his son-in-law had already decided to act. The firm where David worked as an engineer had a legal department. He went there, described his situation to the staff, and asked them to recommend a good lawyer who could help his family recover a debt from his ex-family. "In principle, I could do it," said one of the trust employees, Charles, thoughtfully. "I've dealt with similar situations before, but I'd have to talk to yours first." "I could do it today," the guy said cheerfully. "Just Charles, if you need anything. You work for my father-in-law for free. As a friendship, so to speak, and we'll settle the fee issue separately, if we win the case or even bring the court costs from the defendant." "Don't worry," smiled the lawyer, "but I accept the deal. You don't want to worry the old people." "So, they are already worried," sighed David. Charles did not spend too long talking to Jenkins. First of all, he clarified for himself how Sebastian had made the payment on David's loan to his father. When he found out that the money was transferred directly to the mortgage account from Sebastian's card, he was happy. "That's great," he exclaimed. "This is direct evidence that you transferred funds to the defendant. And not just for nothing, but for specific purposes. Receipts of transfers prove that you participated in the purchase of his apartment, so you're entitled to a share of the sale. Print them out for me, please." Sebastian was hesitant to sue his son-in-law's father. It seemed awkward to him, but his wife and David convinced him. and the man that same evening, with the help of Charles, wrote a pre-trial complaint to John. The document was sent by registered mail, but there was no response from the city. Then Sebastian, again with the assistance of a lawyer, wrote a statement of claim. To it, they enclosed copies of documents on the apartment and the extract from Roserister, found in the network Miranda, and receipts for transfers, and a copy of the claim and a receipt for sending it. The lawyer took all these papers to the district court the next day. Additionally, David attached to the package of documents a flash drive with audio recording of his conversation with his father voice recorder in his phone. He then turned it on just in case. Knowing the character of John, he could agree to something, and a day later refused to retract his words. The guy thought the recording would help him avoid that. He didn't even think about a trial at that time. But the audio came in handy. Charles said it would be another argument in Jenkins' favor. The trial took several months and cost the family a lot of heartache. Kelly and John regularly called the Jenkinses and asked them to settle the case amicably. They offered to wait. They threatened, tried to scandalize. But Sebastian and Miranda were adamant, although the elderly woman often had to take sedatives after such calls. They upset her too much. Miranda was too worried that she couldn't see the true nature of her new relatives in time. "Mom, why were you soothing her? Robert, you're not a psychic after all. How could you have known there was so much dirt in them?" "Exactly. David, I've been around them for years, and I didn't expect this kind of meanness. They're my parents." "You don't understand," Jenkins joked. "This is a big professional setback for me. I'm a psychologist with a long experience, with a doctorate, and it's unthinkable to misjudge people like this. Psychologist, you've been exhorting on the job, and outside of work. You're an ordinary woman, and like every human being, you have the right to make a mistake. So give yourself permission to exercise it." Miranda nodded, agreed. But each subsequent call threw her off balance. Not for nothing. Oh, not for nothing. She'd been so worried before her first visit for the city's scarecrow of heart to their home. She thought, but all things must come to an end. So did litigation. The Jenkins won the battle. The court ordered John to pay the full amount Sebastian spent on his loan, plus legal fees. It took some more time to fight with the bailiffs, who were supposed to collect the money and return it to its rightful owners. David was already at war with this service. Sebastian had no time to bother the bailiffs on a daily basis, and his health no longer allowed him to perform such active and energetic actions. So David appointed himself the legal representative of his father-in-law. 3 months passed after the court decision came into legal force. When the money finally arrived in the Jenkins account, the message about the deposit was read to Sebastian at dinner and was greeted with applause by the family. "I checked at the bank office, and everything is indeed in order," the man said. "And I was thinking, since we have such a sum, and you have some savings, should we not get involved in the mortgage again? Only now we're going to do it by the book. Miranda and I will give you a down payment. You'll make more of your own, won't you? You'll be able to buy a 2-bedroom. Not as luxurious as in that new building, but quite decent. After all, a young family should live in their own home. Is that what you wanted?" To be honest, Sebastian hesitantly began, "David, we didn't really want to sit around. It was Aunt Kelly who gave me a headache, a vacation, and I'm so into this new apartment. But I actually like it better at home. I'm used to it. And so is David. Not if we're disturbing you." "What are you, Lisa?" Miranda exclaimed. "You're not disturbing us at all, but it's for your convenience." The young couple looked at each other, and there was a certain cunning in their glances. "But if it's for our convenience," said Lisa in a slightly strained voice, "then hold on. For our convenience, it would be better not to move out, but to live together with you, because David and I are going to have a child soon, and we are counting on your help with him." She looked at the changed face of her parents and added in the tone of a mom, "Well, please, I'm afraid that I won't be able to cope with the baby alone." "What's the conversation about?" Lisa Sebastian was glowing with happiness. "We'll help you with your grandson. Don't worry, The mother will refuse. I'm still good for something. Why would I refuse? Miranda smiled. I'm very much in favor. I'm not used to staying awake at night at the bedside of my loved ones. Just Lisa, for God's sake. Don't send the father to register the baby, and don't send David either. Just in case. Believe me, in my experience, it's a matter for the mother to handle on her own.
Subscribe and click the bell.
The old boat stood dead weight in the garage, and Lisa sat pensively in the front, in the small wooden triangle at the bow. This boat had been made by Dad himself when he was still young, a long, long time ago. He used to take meticulous care of it, painting it every spring with new varnish, touching up and fixing things. Lisa used to come here to visit the boat when she was homesick for her father. As a child, she loved to sit like this on the very edge of the boat, and it seemed to her that she was not riding on the boat, but flying low over the water, like an Indian goddess, sitting on an invisible flying mat. It had been 5 years since Daddy had been gone, and now there was no one to look after the old boat. Lisa's husband, the jovial joker John, has no interest in the boat. He has little interest in anything but beer and soccer. Is she so wrong about him? A few years ago, trying to please her, the daughter of an academic, he took her to theaters, classical concerts, dressed in costumes, and listened to Wagner with her and her father. And then, when they got married, he listened to Wagner for a while too, though Lisa was already well aware that he didn't need it at all. And now he watched soccer downstairs and drank beer every night. No, Lisa didn't mind at all, to each his own, but why did he have to pretend like that? Now she was disgusted by his pretense and wanted to leave so that she wouldn't see him sitting in her father's favorite chair, with his feet up on the low antique table, eating fish on the newspaper, throwing the scales right on the floor, and drinking beer with his friend Kevin, who came to their cottage from the city almost every weekend. Lisa then went away, upstairs in the attic, and painted her still lifes there. Peonies, poppies, field cornflowers in big empty jugs or in light transparent bottles. Her friend Molly, a classmate, came to visit her from the city too. She and Molly had been friends since childhood, since first grade, and they knew everything about each other and shared their deepest secrets. Molly was her complete opposite. Lisa is fragile, shy, was very sickly as a child, missed school every now and then, came down with another sore throat. Molly is athletic, tall, sturdy, bullied, always able to stand up for herself. They sat at the same desk, and Molly, seeing how draws in Notebook's dreamy neighbor, admired from the bottom of her heart. "Wow, how do you do it?" "I don't know." Lisa shrugged her shoulders. "I just see it in my head and repeat it." "You're an artist." Molly said affirmatively, and this statement defined Lisa's future profession. She did go to art school after 9th grade, and then to the famous Watercolor Academy. Now she herself was already a teacher at this academy, and Molly was a successful coach master of sports in athletics. So different, they nevertheless always found something to talk about and continued to be friends, although, it would seem, what they could have in common. Molly, the daughter of intelligent parents in a city apartment, my mother even had a servant, my father was an academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a respected man, and my mother was also a famous musician, played the piano, taught at the conservatory, and at home gave open lessons. Now there is no mom, no dad, there is only one Lisa and Molly, a loyal, reliable friend on whom you can always rely. Not adapted in the domestic plan, Lisa, she always helped out, at least to get tickets, at least a big cleaning at the cottage, everything. All this was organized by Molly, and many other things too. Lisa just couldn't do without Molly, and John was terribly angry at first when they first started living together. What's she doing here all the time? Doesn't she have her own things to do? Why do you do that, John? Lisa answered with a slight reproachful tone. She's my friend. We're practically like sisters, you know? But I married you. John continued to resent her. Not that sister of yours. Whenever I come home, she's right there, unashamedly lying on our bed. How is that even possible? And she comes out of the bathroom in your robe. I thought she was you from the back the other day. She's sitting at the table by the mirror, with your bath turban on her head, a robe and a mask on her face. I couldn't make it out in the bright light. I came closer. I wanted to hug her, and she started laughing. What, honey? Did you get it wrong? Anyway, you do what you want, but it's got to stop. John went on. I don't want to live in a threesome, and I hope you don't either. That's disgusting. Lisa corrected herself squeamishly. I'm sure, but that was a long time ago, the first year or two of their life together. Then John got used to this state of affairs and didn't mind when Molly fried pancakes in their kitchen or washed windows to help Lisa, who suffered from vertigo. Molly's own home wasn't exactly sweet. She lived in a tiny 2-room apartment with her mother, a half-paralyzed grandmother, and an alcoholic father in the farthest and dustiest factory industrial district. Lisa and the whole family always felt very sorry for her and tried to help her, to buy her a dress, a blouse for holidays, or groceries, ashamed to embarrass her if she seemed inappropriate. Father, bringing tickets to various children's events, Christmas trees, theaters, concerts, and making out vouchers to pioneer camps, never forgot about his daughter's girlfriend, and Molly and Lisa were everywhere together. As they grew older and their interests and studies grew, they were separated a bit. Lisa traveled to gliders with her school, Molly to training camps and competitions, but when they met after separation, they couldn't talk enough. Now that Lisa and John lived mostly in the country, Molly lived in their city apartment, and it was better for her to have a break from annoying relatives and to look after the living space. On weekends, she, if there was no competition or traveling, came to visit them. Molly was not married, nor did she aspire to be. She said with a laugh, "Good men have long ago all taken away. You, Lisa, lucky. You are always lucky. You are happy, and such as me, apparently not supposed to." She laughed gaily, trying to hide her sadness, and immediately rushed either to do the dishes or to cook something delicious in Lisa's big, beautiful kitchen. "I'll be there for you, like a pet." Molly laughed when Lisa convinced her that she would find her destiny. "Molly, you're so sweet." Lisa hugged her, barely reaching her tall friend. "You're like family to me. Do you want me to ask John to introduce you to someone at work?" "No." Molly shook her head. "That's kind of silly. If fate throws up a bow, so be it. And if not, well, I'll be with you my age to roost." She laughed again and kissed her friend on the cheek. "Cheer up, Lisa." As if Lisa were the one who had been deprived of her fate, and not she herself. Molly was not in today. 2 days ago, she had left for another training camp to train young athletes, and in a few days Lisa herself was leaving for practice, for nature, as the artist said, also to train children to paint landscapes. It was stuffy in the bright attic, and the dust flew, spiraling in the sunlight. Lisa suddenly felt so wistful. She got up from behind her easel, stretched, and opened the door. She could still hear the muffled muttering of the television from downstairs, but no one was yelling as loud as they could. Goal, goal. Apparently, the broadcast of the soccer match had already finished, and John and Kevin, just sitting around drinking beer, and the TV was muttering to itself. Lisa went downstairs to pour herself some tea and found that no one was in the spacious kitchen living room anymore. She turned off the TV, put the kettle on, and went outside, and by the garage she saw a startling sight: her own husband and Kevin, a friend of hers, pulling Dad's boat out into the light of day and busily working on it. Lisa smiled happily. "It's beautiful. I guess I was wrong to underestimate him. So what if it's beer? He can if he wants to." Happy, she ran down the steps and past the flower beds. Molly did her best. "Oh, let me in." Lisa laughed. "Your bones are cracking. You'll break them. You track and field athlete." Molly had already prepared an amazing dinner for her arrival. The men, John and Kevin, had roasted the meat. They opened a bottle of light white wine for her and Molly and drank beer as usual, but then also brandy, sweet for tea, said chuckling John, opening a bottle from his father's old stock. Lisa wanted to be indignant because they had agreed not to touch her father's bar unless it was absolutely necessary, but she restrained herself. And today was just such an occasion. They were waiting for her. They were trying, and she was going to make a showdown. Why did they open a collector's cognac? It's low. Dad would have said so. It's low and ugly. In the morning after breakfast, John, Molly, and Kevin, blindfolding her with a kerchief, solemnly led her to the pond, said surprise. Smiling, Lisa guessed, of course, what the surprise was, but she didn't let on. She was trying to play the game of surprise and curiosity, but when they took off her handkerchief for a laugh, 3 times around its axis, Lisa did not pretend to aghast. My God, what a miracle! On the quay stood, barely bobbing on the water, a boat shining with new turquoise paint, and the inscription on the side, Elizabeth, in dark brown ochre, stood out brightly, flashing against the glossy azure. "Thank you, thank you." She threw herself around John's neck and then hugged her friend tightly and even kissed the cheek of an embarrassed Kevin, who was blushing with embarrassment. "Thank you, guys." Wait, there's more." And Molly ceremoniously handed her a large cardboard box. "Is it just me, or is it someone's birthday today, huh?" "Happy birthday." The boys cheered and popped a bottle of champagne. Barely breathing, Lisa pulled a tiny kitten out of the box. "Oh my God, Molly," her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, it's so cute. Do you like it?" Molly perked up. "You ask." Lisa clutched the baby to her chest. "How wonderful you are, how fluffy." "He's tricolored, see." Molly proudly pointed her finger at the tiny body. "I'm told tricolored brings happiness. I'm already the happiest in the world." Lisa almost burst into tears of delight and emotion. "I have you so. All right." She was stopped by her friend. "We're the best, of course." And she laughed, throwing back her head, loudly, joyfully, reminding something of a prancing horse. And now sitting, as in her childhood, on the bow of the boat that had come back to life, Lisa felt a deep sense of peace. How good it felt! Her daddy's old favorite boat, which he had once given her when she was 5 years old for her birthday, pretentiously and lavishly named Elizabeth, was back in service. Here she is silently gliding on the water surface of the pond, cutting through the cassava, algae, breaking through the thickets of lilies. "Oh, look, a kingfisher!" And another one, and another one. Lisa laughed happily, showing her friends a flock of bright azure birds that flew up in a scattering of jewels near the shore. There were always their nests here, I remember. How long had it been since she had ridden like this on this old pond? What a magical beauty it is here. Hey, on the boat. Suddenly it sounded nearby. Watch out! Cutting through the calm, standing water, a motorboat was rushing towards them, roaring and blasting fountains of spray with its propeller, leaving behind a real whirlpool. Look out! The motorboat was getting closer and closer. Lisa stared at the flying jet ski in amazement, and at some point she realized that it was going to hit them. "Stop! Stop!" she screamed, and their own boat, already rocking on the waves, raised by the motorboat and shaking left and right. She was sitting in a Turkish way, as in her childhood, and frantically grabbed the side with her hand. John was yelling and cursing at the top of his voice, waving his oar, trying to push off and avoid a collision. The guy sitting in the motorboat, diving goggles halfway down his face, disheveled gray hair, some kind of tattered t-shirt, was desperately twisting the wheel and yelling back. "It's jammed! Turn, turn, turn." Boom, terrible jolt, noise, crack. Lisa, unable to keep her balance, falls into the water, very near the dreaded spinning propeller. Lisa screams terribly, hides in the depths, and the calm, bright lights, huge lamps, terrible cold. Why is it so cold? Scary creatures wearing the same huge glasses halfway down their faces, the other half not visible either, swathed in white cloth. Pain, eerie, still developing in two. Lisa wants to scream at the top of her voice again, but only a suppressed mooing comes out. She's awake, add anesthesia. Warmth envelops her. The bright light is veiled by a white cloth. The jackhammer is no longer pounding in her head. Good, she can sleep. Lisa didn't finally regain consciousness until a week after the accident at the pond. She had been kept in a medically induced coma the whole time. The painful shock of the terrible injuries was too great. A motorboat propeller had severely damaged her spine and almost ripped off one foot. At the clinic where she was brought, an old surgeon, a friend of Lisa's father, seeing in the patient's chart her rare middle name, worriedly poked his finger. "This is not the daughter of Academician Vishnevsky. We do not know." The residents waved their hands. The surgeon ordered to make inquiries. At the post asked the relatives, and the information was confirmed. It was indeed Elizabeth, the daughter of the same academician. "Hang in there, Lisa," said the doctor. "You'll make it, no matter what it costs me." It cost both her and the doctor a week and a half without rest and almost no sleep. Lisa was under anesthesia and on tranquilizers the entire time. The surgeon on cigarettes and coffee. But in the end, he managed to get her out and reattach her foot and reassemble her spine. Now all we had to do was wait to see if it worked or not. Where are her relatives? With red, watery eyes, the surgeon came out of the operating room. Let them know it was a success. Tomorrow, if it's an uneventful night, we can move her to intensive care. Molly and John were sitting in the spacious country kitchen of the academician's house and drinking beer when the phone rang and John was informed that his wife had been successfully operated on for the third and final time, and now all they had to do was wait for her to wake up. "Will she walk?" Concerned John asked. He was told that it was too early to say anything about that. Shit. John threw the phone on the couch. Survivor. Molly was silent and concentrating on chewing crab chips. Finally, wiping her hands with a napkin and taking a sip from her bottle, she looked up with angry eyes. "I told you not to call an ambulance, motherfucker." She threw the empty bottle at the sideboard. The polished wood gave a resounding thump. The bottle shattered into splinters, and the antique glassware on top of it clinked pitifully. "Look out," rumbled John. "Don't beat up the antiques." "Fuck you. Spit on the floor, Molly, with your antiques. What? Did you bite it? She's alive. Your wife is alive. And still wakes up, calculates everything herself or with someone else's help, and will throw us out of here. And that's only in the best case in the best case. Already Molly was yelling, out of fear and rage. And if you coward had done as I said, we would be in the chocolate now, yes. Calm down, Molly. John walked over to her and put his arm around her shoulders as she sat in the padded chair. Molly, let's not do this, okay? We're so good together. We'll think of something. I already have a plan, Molly. I mean, think about it. What would we look like if we hadn't called an ambulance right away? I'd be in jail right now, and I'd be dead. We have to be careful, you know. Careful, step by step. Okay, Molly has softened up a bit. But what about this one? What if it cracks? No, John said firmly. He's already there. The girl tracked down the doctor and inquired, do you need any medication? You tell me, I'll get it. Medication can't help here. The doctor frowned. We need to operate, and urgently. Surgery. Then do it. What are you waiting for? It's a paid operation. How paid? The doctor didn't say anything. Okay, but there are quotas, right? On the quota, the queue for the year ahead. And if we do not make your grandmother's surgery in the next 2-3 months, you will lose her. How much is the surgery? The doctor wrote down the amount on a piece of paper and silently handed it to Emily. Where are we going to get such money? Exclaimed the girl in despair. Is it impossible to do anything? There are some foundations that help to find money. There are funds, but they tend to help the young and your grandmother. Excuse me, age. What am I supposed to do? Emily cried out of desperation. Don't give up. Your grandmother doesn't need the extra worry right now, and look for money. I don't know. Borrow from someone, take out a loan. Without surgery, how long can she live? Until the first stress. She's in mortal danger from any kind of excitement right now. Can you keep her from worrying? No. Think about it. Surgery is the only thing that will help her. The girl returned home, completely powerless, lay down in bed without undressing. She opened herself up with a blanket and sobbed into her pillow. I'll never find that kind of money, she read. Even if I sold everything here, I wouldn't get that kind of money. What can I do? Where can I find the damn money? There must be some way out. Her sobs were interrupted by a phone call. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. Hello. Emily answered cautiously. Emily, it's Robert. Remember me? You scratched my car. The girl went cold. It had been 3 weeks since the accident, and she had forgotten about it, busy with domestic problems. Yes, I remember. Unsure, she answered. I'm calling to find out when you're going to pay me back for the repair. How much? In a hoarse voice of excitement, she asked. You'd better not know. Robert laughed. I doubt very much you have any. I'll try, I'll earn it. Emily spoke quickly. I'll give it to you as promised. I have another offer. What? The girl was surprised. This is not a telephone conversation. Can we meet tomorrow at the cafe after work? I don't understand. What do you want from me? I told you I'll give you the money. I'll tell you everything when we meet. If you come, otherwise I'll sue you for the repair money. Do you want that kind of trouble? Okay, I'll come over. Emily reluctantly agreed. She showed up a little before the appointed time. Will you order something? The waiter asked her politely. Yes, a cup of coffee, please. She stared hatefully out the window, waiting for Robert. There was a cup of coffee in front of her, but she didn't even touch it. Good evening, she heard and shuddered in surprise. Sorry, I'm late. Business. I suggest we go straight to you. Emily nodded in agreement, glanced at the car parked in front of the cafe, and blushed. The black, shiny side of the car still had a huge scratch on it, and it looked especially ugly in the burgundy rays of the setting sun. "Tell me quickly what you want. Take your time." Robert grinned. "You won't get rid of me that easily, and you'll have to pay for it anyway. I won't sleep with you." "Don't even count on it." Emily cut Emily off angrily. "What makes you think I want to sleep with you?" The young man raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I'm not going to throw myself at your bones," he remarked, hinting at her slim figure. "I have a business proposition for you. If you do everything right, I will not only forgive the debt, but also give you money." Emily looked at him with interest. "What do you want me to do?" "You see, I'm from a wealthy family, and my parents for some reason decided that I must marry the daughter of my father's childhood friend. Is she ugly? That's not the point. I don't love her. I already have a fiancé of my own choosing, but I know for a fact that my parents won't agree to our marriage. My father will think of disinheriting me, and I don't want that." "I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? You're going to play my fiancé." "What?" She looked at Robert in surprise. "Are you out of your mind? I've thought of everything." The young man hurried on. "My father is a very stubborn man. There's no way he'd let me marry someone like you. What's wrong with me?" The girl looked at him suspiciously. "It's written on your forehead. A hillbilly. I still don't understand." "What don't you understand?" "I'll introduce you as my fiancé. My father, of course, will fight to keep us from getting married. In his mind, you're no match for the rich heir to the family business, and we'll have to part ways. I resent the whole world and my father, who did me such an injustice. I will stop eating and sleeping. My torment of lost love will become unbearable for others." Robert accompanied his fiery speech with theatrical gestures. Emily, smiling, looked at him. "But I won't suffer for long, to be honest. I won't last a day without food, but a couple of months or so. My parents, of course, my suffering will bring a lot of grief. My father, out of guilt towards his son, will eventually agree to all my terms. That's when I'll introduce Kelly to them as my true one and only lover. By then, no one will even remember my friend's hated daughter. I get to marry the girl I love, you get the reward, and we're even." $50. Emily said quickly. "What?" "I don't understand, Robert. I want $50,000 and not a dime less for helping you." The girl repeated firmly. Robert looked at her dumbfounded and even coughed, choking with indignation. "Aren't you confused now? Actually, you still owe me for the repair of the car. Isn't it too expensive for your services?" "I didn't expect that. You look like you're doing the right thing." "Or you're paying that much," categorically declared the girl, desperately looking at him. "Or I refuse to participate in your play. Find another fool who agrees to play the village simpleton. I'm sure she'll cost you more. It's none of my business, of course. But why do you need so much money? Where are you going to spend it in your village? As you rightly said, it's none of your business." Emily squeezed her eyes shut, not letting the tears escape. "It's not for me. My grandmother urgently needs an operation. This money is for her. If I don't find this amount of money soon, she could die at any moment. I have no choice." Robert hummed, hesitated for a moment, then waved his hand. "To hell with you. You'll get your $50. When are we going to meet the parents?" The girl sighed with relief and answered, "The day after tomorrow." "Well," Robert said cheerfully and held out his hand to Emily. "Shall we make a deal?" "Deal." She held out hers in return. "I'll be there to pick you up, ready when you are. I'm on my way. Are you ready?" Robert called at the agreed time. "Ready." Looking back at the old woman, the girl replied in a whisper. The grandmother slept in her room. Emily went in from time to time to listen to her breathing. Just stop the car on the outskirts of the village. I don't want Grandma to see you. Why not? The young man was surprised. I don't want to worry her unnecessarily. I can't lie, and telling the truth would kill her. I got it. I'm already here. I'm waiting for you. I'm on my way. Emily hung up. Grandma? The girl peeked into the room. Jenna opened her eyes. I've been invited to visit here. Will you be alone? She looked at her guiltily. Oh, how nice, of course I will. The old woman was happy. Go, have some fun at least. Why should you stay at home with a sick old woman? Your business is young. Are you feeling all right? Don't worry, you'll rest at least. You're exhausted. I see. If you need anything, call me immediately. I'll be right over. Okay. Emily kissed her grandmother. Go with God, my dear. Robert looked with interest at the girl who was hurrying along the road. Yes, she was dressed, to put it bluntly, out of fashion. The young man thought to himself, the dress is simple. They don't wear such clothes nowadays, only for the village. It's good that it's not up to her heels, but her legs are nice and her hair is gorgeous. She should go to a good master. He could make a princess out of her. Emily, feeling his gaze on her, fixed her hair in embarrassment. Usually she put it in a tight braid so it wouldn't get in the way at work, but today she left it loose and slightly curled the ends. Don't you have another dress? Asked Robert when the girl got into the car. What's wrong with my dress? I'm sorry. Famous brands do not sell in our stores, and I don't have the money, as you know. I don't have. Besides, I'm supposed to play a hillbilly, and we have our own fashion. We can't keep up with you city folk, can we? Okay, no offense. Peacefully said Robert and started the car. It suits you. Let's go. And he started the car. Now listen to me. You have to create the image of a country girl who is dead set on the major. Sleeping and seeing how to marry me off so you can get a city license. Your parents can't guess that you've got a college degree under your belt. Let them see you as a poorly educated, uneducated girl. It's gonna be tough. It's okay. For $50,000 you'll work hard and you'll play it right. Remember, you have to scare them, push them away. Don't say or do anything to make them feel sorry for you or, God forbid, sympathize with you. We're here, Robert announced, stopping the car outside the 3-story mansion. Have you memorized everything? Yes, I'll try to play my part well. The young people walked into the house. Emily was worried. Robert, at last, we've been waiting for you. Mother was the first to rush out to greet them. Dear Mom and Dad, Robert bowed dutifully to his parents, giving them a solemn look. Meet Emily, my fiancée. Emily was shy, sunk her gaze and remained silent, a light blush playing on her cheeks. Son? The father's eyebrows rose in amazement. Surprised, so surprised. Are you sure that this is the girl you are ready to call your wife? What's wrong with that, Dad? Emily is a very nice, sweet girl. Yeah, she's not what you're used to seeing around me, but that's what I appreciate about her. What a big house you have. Gaining courage, Emily announced the living room with a glance. It must be worth a lot of money. Great. My grandmother and I have a small house. And the furniture. She was genuinely admiring the furnishings. I don't even want to hurt it. Playing her role, she began to look with interest at the paintings hanging on the walls. Paintings, she touched one. Never understood why to buy them. There is no use from them, only collect dust. Paintings are aesthetically useful, if you know what I mean, grumbled Father spitefully, looking at the girl. They should be admired, eh? Emily looked around again. Why is the vase on the floor? The girl touched it. Careful, my dear, Kathy exclaimed warningly. It's a 16th century vase. It can't be. And how well preserved is it? Wow, I've only seen these in history books. The parents were pathetic to look at. Robert chuckled to himself, but didn't interfere. I suggest we sit at the table. My father resolutely went to his seat. Oh, really? I'm so confused. Kathy had the servants bring the hot pot. Emily, what do you do? I work on the farm. And where did you and our son meet? In a nightclub, wasn't it? What do you think? That if I'm from the country, I'm so dark? No, I don't think so. My mother was embarrassed. Do you live with your grandmother? Where are your parents? They died in a car accident. I'm so sorry, we didn't know. Oh, it's okay. It was a long time ago. I don't really remember them. We're serving meat. Emily, pretending to be an uneducated hillbilly, grabbed a fork and hurriedly began to eat the meat. When she noticed Kathy's horrified look on her face, she was embarrassed. I'm sorry. With her mouth full, she said, Am I doing something wrong? Take your time, take the knife. That's not the way to behave at the table here. Robert said in a deliberately loud voice, Oh, I didn't know. The fork accidentally fell out of the girl's hands right on the floor. I'm sorry, I'll clean it up. She's blushing. I'm so clumsy. That's okay. No. Emily jumped up. I'll clean up my own mess. I'm used to doing everything myself. That's commendable, of course, but in our house we have special people to do it. Kathy remarked and pressed her lips together. Robert was having fun. Wow, I'd already believed she was so inept. Now her parents will definitely do everything they can to get rid of her. When the maid had cleaned up the floor and everyone had finally settled down, Sebastian spoke. It's nice in your village, the fresh air, the freedom. My childhood was spent in the countryside with my grandmother, too. That's true. Looking at him dreamily, Emily answered. But I want to move to the city as soon as possible. As soon as I get married to Robert, I will not stay a day in the village. Your house is big enough room for everyone. It's good that you don't have to rent an apartment. A lot of our girls work for an apartment. Do you know how expensive it is to rent an apartment nowadays? And I was lucky, yes, my favorite. She smiled sweetly at the young man. Well, maybe you will not be very comfortable to live with us. Cautiously asked the mother. Usually young people try to live away from their parents. Why not? You've got a big place to dance. We don't even have to see each other. We'll take a part of the second floor, for example. Surely there's an emergency exit in the house. She hummed in satisfaction when her father nodded his head, confirming her guess. But our villagers will have one when I tell them what a fancy house I'll be living in. Even having a baby won't be a problem. Robert will hire a nanny, and we've put them in a separate room next to you. Oh, I love it here. I'd move in right now. Too bad Grandma will be alone. Maybe you have a room for her, too. We'll find a room for her. Oh, we'll all live here. Robert realized from the confused look on his parents' faces that it was time to end the show. He was afraid of overdoing it. I'm sorry, he said, rising from the table. But we should get going. I have to take Emily home, and then I have some errands to run. Everyone stood up. I apologize if I did something wrong, Emily said. She was terribly ashamed of her behavior. She was intelligent, well-mannered, and could hardly restrain herself not to immediately confess everything to her unhappy and frightened parents. I'm very glad Robert has such a good mom and dad. Goodbye, smiling politely. The parents walked the young people to the car and breathed a sigh of relief as they drove away from the house. What was that all about? The father inquired. Where did he get this country girl from? He always liked glamorous girls. I expected a bright blonde with plump lips and a tight dress that left no room for imagination. And this, Kathy said thoughtfully, there's something about her. Yes, she's different, but you've noticed, Father, she's not lost her shyness and blushing. It's so unusual. That's the first thing I noticed, by the way, but I kept quiet. So what do we do now? We'll see. While the parents were at a loss as to why their son had brought to their house a girl who was not suitable for him, young people sat in the car, looked at each other, and finally gave vent to their stifling laughter. You're so imaginative. Robert laughed. I almost didn't believe that you were really so ill-mannered and that you were using me to get out of town. You have no idea. Laughing to the point of tears, said Emily. How ashamed I was to behave like that. I'm not like that at all. And there are no such people in my neighborhood. I just remembered the heroine of some show and copied her behavior. Hey, have you ever thought about being an actress? You could play such an idiot on stage. I did it. The girl grew serious. Only for her grandmother's sake. I hope I don't have to meet your parents again. I don't want to deceive them again. I was immediately disgusted to take part in your play. Don't worry about it, the young man said lightly. I'm sure they will already today forbid me to communicate with you even close. You've done your job. When do I get the money? As soon as my parents demand that I break up with you immediately, I will immediately transfer the amount to your account. No offense, but I need to make sure we're on the same page. When Robert returned home, he expected his parents to attack him with righteous anger, but nothing happened. They locked themselves away. The young man grinned, probably cleaning up his feelings about Emily. Okay, I won't go to them. Let them calm down, think it over. Let's leave the conversation until morning. He went quietly to his room, and confident that his plan had worked, fell into a deep sleep. Son? 2 days later, Sebastian reminded him. My mother and I have decided to have a celebration on the occasion of our 30th anniversary together. We have already ordered dinner at our favorite restaurant. I congratulate you. Robert was worried. That's right, solemnly announced the father. Mother and I want to see you with Emily, of course. What about Emily? The young man was stunned. I thought you didn't want her in our house anymore. Sebastian knew his son very well, so he realized at once that he was up to something, but he couldn't figure out what. She's certainly peculiar, the man said, but she's very open and kind, no matter how strange it may seem. The mother interjected. We liked her. Of course, added the father. We'll have to work with her a little to teach her some basic table manners, say, but it's all such trifles. The main thing is that she's sincere. Robert, how many grades of education does she have? 11. Mechanically answered the young man. He suddenly realized that his plan had failed miserably. That's wonderful. Kathy exclaimed. We'll hire tutors and prepare her for college. She seemed a little silly to me at first, but I was shocked by her behavior at the table. But then my father and I discussed it all and realized her directness and ingenuousness were to blame, and it can be cured. The woman laughed. But it is impossible to teach kindness and openness. I agree with my mother. It is rare to meet such girls nowadays. She only needs a little dressing up and makeup. With your permission, I'll do it myself. It needs a woman's hand. I'll do everything. I'll pick out dresses for her in advance. I'll enroll her in a beauty parlor. We'll make a real gem of an evening out of her. I think, discreetly, Robert remarked, she won't agree to go to the beauty parlor with you, and she won't accept the dress. You don't know girls. They're ready to store all day long. And you don't know Emily," parried Robert. What a bastard! He thought angrily. His insides were boiling with indignation. It seems my plan has really failed. I've missed something. But I won't give up so easily. As he left the house, he immediately started calling Emily. They like you. He boiled. I didn't expect them to like you. They really believe that you are my fiancé. Who's here? Emily asked, nodding her head at the young man and girl who had entered the room. This is my friend David. Shit. Robert cursed. What bad timing. David? Kathy smiled. Why are you dear late? The woman picked up the young man with one hand and the girl with the other and led him over to Emily and Robert. You probably haven't met Emily yet, have you? This is our son's fiancée. He has kept her so carefully hidden from us, he's no good. The girl saw David's eyes open wide in surprise. He had already opened his mouth to say something when Robert interrupted his friend. David, I have something urgent to discuss with you. Shall we? Explain what's going on. David stared at him in bewilderment. Who is this girl? And why is your mother calling her your fiancée? I thought she was your fiancée, Kelly. What, did you trade her for this one? He nodded his head toward Emily and wrinkled his nose. I don't know how you could get involved with her and bring her here. Are you out of your mind? Shut up. Robert stopped his friend. It's not what you think. And he told me about the bride his parents had set him up with and the pact with Emily. So she's making this play in front of her parents just for the money? Yes, and I'm begging you not to tell anyone, especially Kelly. She can't know anything. Swear you won't say anything. I swear. Promised David. But I don't suppose your mother would mind a bride like that, would she? That's the trouble. We agreed that Emily would get drunk, which would make her parents angry, but now I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't bother them. I can help you. How? I'll seduce her in front of everyone. I don't think Kathy and Sebastian can forgive her for cheating on them. Just don't go overboard. I don't want a scandal. Don't worry, you'll see a little flirting, and then in front of your parents, I'll steal her away. They're smart people. They'll know why we're going to be alone. How do you like that idea? It's not a bad idea. Robert said hesitantly, Will my fiancée fall for it? Maybe I should warn her. Let her play along. Absolutely not. It has to look natural. Are you questioning my ability to seduce girls? With a conspiratorial wink at his friend, David headed over to Emily. Emily? He decided to take the bull by the horns. You're adorable. May I have this dance? Oh, she was embarrassed and looked anxiously back at Robert. I can't dance. Oh, that's all right. We'll fix that. In fact, I think Robert will mind. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I entertained his fiancée a little. I can see you've been bored. He put his arm around her and led her to the dance floor. David put one hand on her back and the other below her waist. I don't like you hugging me too frivolously, Emily said sternly to her partner. She was already drunk, but she realized that her friend Robert was up to something indecent. Come on, roughly said David right in her ear. I know everything. You don't have to pretend with me. I can see right through people like you. Robert, I know you're easily seduced, doll, and your fiancé's parents must realize that, so you'll have to play along. I'm sure it won't be too hard for you, though. Robert's not your first hookup, is he? Come on, give me a big hug. If you start getting handsy. She gave him a threatening look, Emily. I'm not responsible for myself. I might punch you. I doubt anyone can stop me from doing that. We'd have to look natural for my friend's parents to believe that you're just a corrupt wench and can get carried away with anyone, especially when drunk. I've seen you with a glass of wine, and Robert's parents saw it too. Now I'm gonna have to kiss you, so let's not disappoint them. Just try it." With indignation, she gritted her teeth. "You'll have to be patient, otherwise no one will believe that you are easy to seduce." With these words, he sank his lips into hers. And now the next act of the play awaits the audience. It's time for us to get some privacy. Emily swayed slightly, not firmly followed David, accompanied by the perplexed looks of Robert's parents. Emily didn't care what they thought of her. In the morning, she opened her eyes with difficulty. Her head ached and her mouth felt as dry as the Sahara. She struggled to get out of bed and went to the kitchen. She drank a glass of water and looked into her grandmother's room. "Why are you lying down?" she asked her. "Are you sick? Maybe an ambulance? What's wrong with you, granddaughter?" The grandmother asked anxiously. "I've never seen you like this in my life. Why did you get drunk? I was so scared when they brought you in the car. You didn't look like yourself. Disheveled, I couldn't say a word. I had another heart attack, and today I can't get up. I'm sorry, Grandma, for upsetting you. I'm so ashamed, really. Why did you do that? Did I teach you to do that? And it's so embarrassing in front of the neighbors. But please forgive me. I'm really worried about you. How can you stay here alone? I don't have long to live. God forbid if you get addicted to drink. Who will support you?" "What's wrong, Grandma?" Emily sat on the edge of the bed next to the old woman. "That was the first and last time. And you're not going to die. We'll definitely think of something." "No, you can't help me now. How are we going to get the money for the operation? I'll live as long as God gives me. I wish you'd get better. I don't want to leave with a heavy heart. I just want to know that you found your happiness. Otherwise, you'll be all alone." Jenna leaned back on the pillow. "I'm tired. You go, I'll sleep a little." Emily went back to her room, lay down on the bed and thought. What to do? With Robert, the idea did not work out. Why did she even agree to participate in this adventure? For my grandmother's sake, of course, only for her. But now I can't take money from him. I don't need anything from him at all. The girl jumped out of bed and went to the window. "I like him." Suddenly she confessed. "Oh my God!" Emily grabbed her head. "What am I thinking? How can I, a country girl, dream of such a guy? He's got a fiancée. She's a match for me. Will he pay attention to me? He's probably forgotten my name by now. That's what I should do. Don't look at other people's fiancés. That's all." She shook her head. It is necessary to throw out bad thoughts and continue to live as before. All these acquaintances with the sons of rich parents has not brought happiness to anyone. I need to think about work and my grandmother. Yes, it's decided, she said firmly to herself. I will never agree to meet him again. I must stop all communication with him before I finally lost my head. Forget it like a bad dream. Emily? Jenna looked out the window one night and said, "What's that car parked in front of our house?" "It's a stranger." "Strange? Who could it be?" "You don't know?" "I know. The girl's a little gloomy. I'll find out." She went out into the street with a shawl over her shoulders. "Why did you come here?" She spoke sharply. "I told you not to bother my grandmother. Why didn't you call? You can't say everything on the phone, and I have no one else to talk to." Robert confessed, approaching her. "The whole plan is down the drain. David, my so-called friend," he grinned wryly. "He'd dropped in on my parents by accident, and he'd said so much. I didn't expect it from him. He set me up. He said that you were only with me for money, and he told me that a couple months ago I had another girl. I don't know what to do now. How do I face my parents?" The best part. Emily looked boldly at Robert. Explain yourself to your parents. Stop lying. They don't deserve to be treated like this. Confess everything. It'll be easier on yourself. I'm sure they'll understand you. They're not animals. They're just wishing you happiness, not realizing you have a sweetheart. No, no, no. I can't tell them everything right now. You said you'd help, so you have to follow through. Don't count on me. The girl replied firmly. I refuse to take part in this farce. I've done so much already. This is for your amusement, and I have no time to play with toys. I have to think about where to find money for my grandmother's operation. Leave me alone. Don't worry about it. I'm ready to pay for your grandma's treatment. Give me an account to transfer the money to. But I didn't keep my end of the bargain. I don't care. I don't care anymore. If I say I'll help you without conditions. Well, I don't know. Emily's confused. I don't feel comfortable taking money from you, so David's right. David is a traitor. I don't know why he even got involved in this case, but I'll figure it out. Tell me where to wire the money, and I will do it immediately. Jenna's operation was a success. It was done as soon as the money came in. Everything's going well. The attending physician remarked. Your grandmother will be back home as good as new. Thank you, doctor. Grandma was on the mend. The girl was flying on wings until one day the phone rang. Emily? One day she heard the phone ring. It's Kathy, Robert's mom. Remember me? You were at our house and then at the restaurant where you disappeared so suddenly with David? Yes, of course I remember. Hello. Orabev, the girl replied. I forbid you to mess with my son's head. I know that you decided to marry Robert for the money, and I know that you have already received a tidy sum on your account. Well, I don't want you anywhere near my son anymore. You got your money in your pocket. Leave Robert alone. Shame on you for covering up for Grandma's illness. But the girl tried to explain. I'm not going to listen to your lies. It is you with your beauty and supposed innocence turned my son's head, but I will not be fooled. I know you're kind. I forbid you to come within a cannon shot of my son. If you try anything else to trick him, I'll go to the police. You're a fraud. That's not true. You're wrong. I don't want to hear a word of it. You got the money, disappeared, broke Robert's heart. And how nice you seemed to Sebastian and me. But in fact, you turned out to be a calculating hypocrite. You've gained our trust, so that your foot in our house will not be in our house anymore. Emily, discouraged by the call, listened silently to the short beeps in the receiver. What did you want? She said, trying to hold back her tears. Everything had happened as planned. Now for the real bride, Robert. The road is clear. We have achieved our goal. And me. The girl threw the phone on the table and cried. Robert walked from corner to corner, measuring the room with his steps, glancing nervously at his watch. It's time to go to the airport, he remarked. I can't be late and not meet Kelly on time. He quickly got into the car. Kelly? He opened his arms to the girl. I didn't expect you to come now. You were going to be home in 2 months, weren't you? This is for you. He handed her a bouquet of red roses. What's wrong? You're the one I should be asking. What happened? Coldly, the girl answered him. I don't know what you mean. David called me and told me you had another fiancé. You think I was supposed to sit around and wait for you to marry her. I demand an explanation. Why are you listening to him? Robert laughed nervously. He's always been jealous of me. I think he told you that on purpose so that you would leave me. Don't you know he's jealous of you? He was just waiting for a chance to break us up. I don't really have any other fiancé but you. You mean? The girl looked at him suspiciously. He's making it all up? Not exactly. Robert hesitated. "Why don't we sit down somewhere and I'll explain it all to you?" "All right." Kelly agreed reluctantly. "But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you." The young people arrived at the restaurant. Robert ordered dinner. "Look, I did it for us. My parents had the idea of marrying me off to the daughter of a friend of my father's. They wanted to boost business, but they forgot to ask me if I wanted to marry her. What was I supposed to do? I came up with a plan, and Emily came along." "Oh, so the girl David was talking about was a girl?" "I'm not saying no. She must have turned my parents against me. They would have forbidden me to marry her. I would naturally be in inconsolable grief for some time, until my father relented and gave me permission to marry the one I had long considered my fiancée. You do not deceive me." Kelly looked at him jealously. "Was it all like this?" "Of course it was. Why would I deceive you? Everything I do is just for you and me." "And the money? Did you really pay her?" "I did. She kept her end of the bargain, but most importantly, the plan worked, and now I can introduce you to your parents. When were you going to tell me all this? I was expecting you in 2 months. I couldn't have said anything over the phone. You wouldn't have talked to me. Now do you believe that I didn't cheat on you? Tell me, am I forgiven?" "I haven't decided yet." The beauty said haughtily, "When you introduce me to your parents, then we'll see." Robert's decision to talk to his parents was not easy. "Mom, Dad," when the moment was right, he said, "I have something to confess to you." "What is it?" "I have to tell you that Emily is not my fiancée. I lied to you." "What, not your fiancée?" Kathy was shocked by the message. "Then who is?" "I met her by accident. She scratched my car. Since she didn't have the money to fix it, I offered to help her out a little." "What kind of game are you playing?" Dad frowned. "I don't want to marry the girl you insist on marrying. In fact, I have a fiancée, and I love her very much." "Wait, so everything that's been going on here lately is a hoax, an act?" The mother looked at Robert in confusion. "And who is this girl really?" "Her name is really Emily. She really lives in the countryside, but she has a college degree. She is a veterinarian. But she pretended to be your fiancée for money. She did it to save her grandmother, not for profit. Her grandmother needed heart surgery, so we made a deal. She helps me, and I help her. Do you realize I said some pretty nasty things to her on the phone?" Kathy, pale as chalk, was furious with her son. "I accused the poor girl of God knows what, and I didn't even give her a chance to defend herself. What position have you put us in? For God's sake, tell me, how is she doing? I haven't seen her in a long time. But have you even tried calling her?" "Many times, but she doesn't answer and ignores my messages." "Why are you doing this, Robert?" Sebastian looked angrily at his son. "Couldn't you have come and told her you didn't want to get married?" "I couldn't." Robert was desperate. "You've been running around with that bride of yours like a piece of paper, praising her, telling everyone about your upcoming wedding. What would you say to me, Papa, if I came and said I didn't want to marry that girl? I wanted to marry this girl. Would you have listened to me? I had to cheat, and you involved an innocent girl in your schemes. Anyway, now you know everything. I'd like you to meet my real fiancée, Kelly. She just got back from overseas." "No way." "Father cut me off. Stop us from making new acquaintances. You better deal with your fiancés first." "Mom." Robert turned to her, looking for support. "Father's right." Kathy said thoughtfully, "When you're sure you're ready to marry her, you can bring her to our house. We don't want to witness any more of your love dramas, and we're not ready to get to know Kelly." "Parents, I didn't expect this from you." Robert was desperate. Now he was afraid that Kelly would take offense at his refusal to introduce her to her father and mother. Now this topic is no longer discussed in our house, Sebastian said firmly. Robert thought how to explain himself to Kelly and was afraid of this conversation. However, the girl did not even ask when the meeting with her parents would take place. She, having returned to her homeland, immediately plunged into social life and completely captured the attention of the young man. Robert, the parents were offended. We do not see you at all. I have almost no free time, justified the son. Kelly doesn't like to stay at home. We then in the club at midnight, then at a restaurant for dinner, and in the afternoon I work. I don't have much time to sleep, and there's no time to go out. She'll drive you crazy. Mother was worried. I really missed her. Robert smiled. Even a minute without her seems irretrievably lost. The young man was being sly. He did not want to admit that the relationship with his beloved was not so cloudless. Kelly, I'm so glad you're here, he said, admiring his bride. I'm glad too. She pouted her lips. But do you know what it cost me to cancel my contract? I've lost so much money, you can't even imagine. Darling, I'm prepared to reimburse you for all your losses. Ask for anything you want. Well, I don't know. She raised her eyes to the sky, showing that she was very concerned about the choice of gift. I've been wanting a new car for a long time. Mine is too simple for your fiancé status. You should be ashamed of yourself. She wagged her finger playfully and winked slyly at the young man. For having such an old model of car. Okay, let's go to the car dealership tomorrow and buy the one you want. Honey, Kelly squealed. You're such a sweetheart. I adore you. This is gonna be the best present ever. I'd forgive you anything for it. The next day they went shopping. I want this one. Kelly pointed her finger at an expensive SUV. Why do you need such a huge car? Robert tried to talk her out of it. Why don't we find you something more feminine? Just say you didn't have the money. Kelly folded her arms across her chest and turned away from her fiancé. She'd always been cranky, but she'd never disliked that behavior before. Now, however, Robert found himself increasingly annoyed by her petulance. He glimpsed the manager, his face devoid of any emotion, but with a sneer in his eyes. You gave $50,000 to some girl, and you spared me your fiancé. Why do I have to beg you for gifts? Explain. A real man never refuses his woman anything. Or maybe you've had enough of me. You know I'm not. Calm down, please. You don't have to make a scene here. I'll buy this car. If you like it so much to please you, I'll take a star out of the sky. No offense. He kissed her on her cheek, which was blushing with annoyance, and nodded to the manager, who was watching the lovers with a nonchalant look. That evening they sat at a table in the restaurant and discussed the purchase. Honey, I'm so grateful to you for this regal gift. I've already posted a photo of the car on my social media page. I've never gotten so many likes before. The phone does not seize, they call, asking when it will be possible to ride on my Swallow. Listen, Kelly, I'm gonna need your help soon, interrupted Robert's enthusiastic exclamation. I have a dinner with a business partner in 3 days. He'll be with his wife, and I need your presence. Darling, can you hear me? He called out to the girl, who was deftly typing on her phone. What? She looked at the groom unhappily, reluctantly, breaking away from her occupation. Eh? No, sorry, I cannot. Aren't you at all interested in what I do? Honey, it's so boring. She wrinkled her nose and looked at the phone again. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave. Where? We haven't even had lunch yet. My agent texted me. Standing up from the table, Kelly said. There's a casting call coming up. I can't miss it. I need new contracts. Bye, sweetie." She sent him an air kiss and ran off. I think. The young man watched thoughtfully as his fiancée quickly got into the car, on the go, talking to someone on the phone. "Kelly, all you need from me is money." She had changed a lot since returning home. She used to be interested in the firm's business. And her temper tantrums, no, we've had fights before, but somehow it doesn't irritate me the way it does now. It feels like she's playing a role, and it turns out it's not sincere. Can't she still forgive me for Emily? It's my fault, of course, but she should realize that this whole stupid situation with the fake bride is long over. That evening, Kelly called Robert and said, "Honey, I'm ready to go out with your partner or whoever, but only on one condition. You give me a necklace. I bought a dress suitable for such a dinner, but my jewelry looks too plain with it." "All right." The young man immediately agreed. "We'll be sure to buy you a necklace. We'll meet at the jewelry salon tomorrow." My heart pricked unpleasantly. Emily would never put conditions on me. She would immediately agree to go with me. Stop. What am I thinking? The young man blushed involuntarily. How easy and simple everything was with Emily, how sincere and heartfelt she was. I had fun and freedom with her. I thought she even liked me. He involuntarily smiled, remembering the cute features of the girl's face, her long hair, simple dress, which sat well on her slender figure. The next day at the jewelry store, Kelly made another disgusted scene. "This necklace will not go with your dress." The saleswoman patiently explained to the girl, "You are thin, and on your chest jewelry will look bulky. Do you realize what you're saying? How dare you embarrass me in front of my fiancé? Who the hell do you think you are? You stupid, brainless chicken." Kelly was outraged. "No, how insolent is that? Robert, she just insulted me, called me skinny, and said that the necklace doesn't fit me." "Kelly," Robert said gently, trying to calm the furious bride, "why don't you look at another one? Just to compare. I think the salesman's right." "I get it." Kelly glared angrily. "You felt sorry for my money because I picked the most expensive necklace, and I didn't really want to buy anything from you guys. I don't want anything. And I'm not going to the appointment. Okay, that stupid sales girl just made me look stupid. But you, Robert, how could you question my taste? Can't I decide what kind of jewelry to match my dress? I'm sorry, my love. If you want, we can buy this necklace." The incident was over, but relations between the young people were getting worse. And more often at such moments, Robert thought of Emily and caught himself thinking that he missed her. "Son," Kathy asked me one day, "when are you going to introduce us to your bride? It's been so long. You don't say a word. Your father doesn't want to talk about it. And what can I do? I want grandchildren. Stop resenting each other. Are you and Kelly coming over for dinner tomorrow night?" Kathy made sure the table was properly set. "The cook has prepared a gourmet meal." "What are you doing here?" "It's like we're hosting royalty." A model, what a profession. Sebastian was angry with his wife. "I don't want to make a fool of myself," she told her husband. The girl lived abroad, accustomed to good cuisine. I wish I had hired a chef from the restaurant. However, our chef also knows a thing or two about food. That's my Kelly. Robert introduced his fiancée to the parents. The girl looked arrogantly at the owners of the house and gritted her teeth. "Hello, I thought you had a bigger house. Robert, he's been buzzing my ears about what a great house you have." "I think so." Sebastian replied discreetly. "There's plenty of room for everyone, but we're not going to live here anyway, are we, love?" She smiled at Robert. "I hope my future husband will buy a house for us. Can we go to the table now?" I'm starving. Kathy replied confusedly. Yes, come in. Everything's ready. Kelly looked at the table and sat down at the table. I've lived abroad. They don't serve too many dishes. We didn't come here to eat. I can't eat too much. I have to keep in shape. I think it's very irrational to spend so much money on food. But I have men in my house, justified the hostess. They are used to eating well. And you, dear Kathy. The guest remarked, it would be good to look after your figure. After all age, it's time to think about your health. Kelly softly pulled her Robert. You're being defiant. What did I say? She shrugged. Every self-respecting woman should strive to keep young. That's abroad do not make a cult of food. They watch out for health and appearance. Kelly is right, of course. Barely holding back her tears, her mother said, I do love to eat, and being overweight is ruining me. I actually think, the girl spoke again, it's much better to have these dinners in a restaurant. No dishes, no hassle around the house. I'm not going to spend most of my life in the kitchen. Robert and I will eat at restaurants. Can't we talk about something else? Dad broke the silence. When are you getting married? We haven't talked to Kelly about it yet. Robert was embarrassed. The wedding can wait. Kelly looked sternly at the groom. I've signed a new contract, very favorable and promising for my career, and I'm not going to lose it. What about the grandchildren? Kathy asked shyly. I was so dreaming that you would soon have a little one. Oh, she waved her hands. I don't even think about that. A baby would put an end to my modeling career. No way. No kids while you're young. The age of the model is short. When I'm closer to 40, I can think about children. And in general, diapers, cradles, it's not for me. Kelly's cell phone screen suddenly lit up. She quickly read the message. I'm sorry, but we have to go. She stood up. Honey, will you walk me out? I've missed a lot already, you know. Sure. What are you talking about? Lisa nodded. Go, of course. Let John take you to the train or whatever it is you're going to do. That's the point, said Molly. Exactly how do you get there? All of ours had already left, and I decided at the last minute. It was a shame to leave you alone in the city like that, you know. That's why I can't get the tickets I need. Airplane tickets are too expensive, and the train tickets are all sold out. Would you mind if John gave me a ride to New York in his car? And from there are good tickets. I checked. Of course, what are you talking about? Lisa exclaimed. Who would I be if I objected? You both care about me so much, of course you'll go. Then we'll say goodbye. Molly smiled. We have to leave early tomorrow to make it on time. We'll leave at 4 o'clock in the morning, right, John? Sort of, agreed John. And you, honey, sleep, don't worry. And don't forget to take your pills. They're good for you. The day when Lisa was left all alone, apart from the nurse and the kitten, was unusually nice and sunny. It was like an unplanned holiday in the middle of November. Lisa asked the nurse to take her out into the garden, sat in the sunshine, and breathed the fresh air. Then had breakfast at 11 o'clock as usual and went to the veranda to work while there was good light. And about an hour later, heard the noise of the automatic gate pulling away, surprised and alarmed. Had John and Molly really returned? Maybe they had forgotten something important, say, a passport, and would now be late for the train. But a completely unfamiliar car drove into the yard. Out of it came strangers, a woman and a man, and with them a small child. As if they were at home, they went to the front door of the house and opened it with a key. Emily, Emily, shouted Lisa to the nurse. Emily, come here, for God's sake. Some strangers have come to our yard, Go ask them what they want." Emily left, and Lisa sat alone on the veranda again, listening to some lively dialogue between her and the strangers. She could hardly make out the words from the veranda, and here came the disturbed Emily, and with her the man who had come in the big unfamiliar car. "Good afternoon. Weren't you supposed to leave before today as agreed?" "What do you mean?" "I don't understand, Lisa. What was the agreement?" "With whom? With the salesman, of course." The man chuckled. "We bought the house." "You bought the house?" Lisa's eyes darkened. "No, it can't be. This is some kind of terrible mistake. This is my house. I live here. I've lived here for a long time. The cottage belonged to my late father, then to me. But you sold it to us, didn't you?" The man pulled some yellow paper out of his bag. "Look at this. Your husband signed the contract for you with a power of attorney." "Read it, read it. You gave him the power of attorney." "I did." Lisa echoed. But I didn't think, I didn't know." "Listen to me. I had absolutely no intention of selling the cottage." She shrieked, finally realizing what was happening. John must have been deceived, missiled. Wait, I'll call him now." She pulled out her phone and pressed the call button. There was no dial tone for a long time, and then the cell phone operator announced, in the voice of a mindless mechanical robot, that the subscriber was not answering or temporarily unavailable. Not picking up the phone, probably communications out of the way. "They left this morning, John and Molly. You know Molly has a plane out of New York today," she said to the man who was standing beside her, looking around, looking bossy. "Mason, what's going on here?" His wife came in and also looked at Lisa with surprise. "And who are you exactly?" "I am the owner of this cottage," Lisa told her rather uncertainly. "You were sold it by mistake." "By mistake?" The woman became agitated. "By mistake, you say?" "Yes, I'll call the police." "What kind of mistake?" "This isn't a joke, my dear. Here's the deed, here's the register. This is our house now, so I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." "Leave?" Lisa was indignant. "But we're not going to live here anyway, are we, love?" She smiled at Robert. "I hope my future husband will buy a house for us. Can we go to the table now?" "I'm starving." Kathy replied confusedly. "Yes, come in. Everything's ready." Kelly looked at the table and sat down at the table. Where do you expect me to go?" "What do we care?" The woman smirked. "It's not our concern anymore." Shaking with terror, Lisa dialed Molly and John again and again, but could not reach them. Then, in utter despair, she called William. "Hello, William. It's Lisa. Yes. You know, I've had a terrible situation. Some strangers came and said I'd sold them the cottage, but I hadn't. John signed the contract by power of attorney. Someone must have cheated him. Probably the same people who came are kicking me out. Where am I going to go? Who will carry me to the cab, to the apartment? I don't even know who to turn to anymore. Could you come and take me to town? Please, I'll pay." William assured her that he would be there soon and asked her not to worry and to tell the strangers that he would come and take her away within the hour. Another conversation. Nodded the newfound hosts. "Wait, of course. What are we, some kind of fiends?" And they left the veranda and started to carry bags and boxes from the car. Lisa sat in her wheelchair, swallowing tears and convulsively clutching her pale, skinny hands, breaking, crunching her fingers. "Emily, please," she asked the nurse. "Would you be so kind as to fetch me my pills?" "Yes, I know it's not evening yet, but I'm terribly worried, Emily. Bring them, please." After taking the pills, Lisa was able to breathe more freely. The pressure in her chest was gone, and her eyes no longer swam in dark circles. Her head cleared, her eyes grew heavy, and she practically fell asleep sitting in the chair. It seemed like only 5 minutes had passed and William had already arrived. "What's going on here?" he asked worriedly. "Come on, put your arms around my neck. I'll carry you to the car. Don't forget Trishka." Lisa got worried. He mustn't stay here alone. Trisha's loaded too. And Emily the nurse, who in the meantime had managed to collect some things Lisa needed and left for the city. At the apartment they got another unpleasant surprise. Lisa's keys did not fit the lock, which was shining with a new keyhole on the door, familiar from childhood. "What is it?" "I don't understand anything." Lisa cried out in despair. "What is it?" "Why can't I enter my own apartment?" "Calm down." William pressed the bell button. "We'll take care of it. What do you want?" An elderly woman, a complete stranger to Lisa, opened the door on a chain. "Who are you here to see?" "I live here." Lisa shouted and tried to reach forward in her wheelchair and grab the door with her hand, but William intercepted her just in time and put his foot through the gap. "Listen," he said to the... "Did you tell me everything?" The girl looked at David angrily. "And now tell your friend how you offered to deceive him and get a tidy sum for it." "What?" Robert was stunned. "David, what is she talking about?" "Oh, yes." The young man blushed. "I suggested that she call Emily and demand that she pay back what she owed. It's your own fault." He lashed out at his friend. "He gave some girl all that money. Kelly was your fiancée, but she couldn't even dream of that kind of money." "It's my family's money," Robert said, looking at David menacingly. "I decide what to do with it. She didn't tell you about the new SUV, about the diamond necklace I bought not too long ago. Was that not enough for her?" "No, she didn't talk about your gifts." The young man shrank under his friend's scornful gaze. "You know, I'm not even upset that you, Kelly, lied to me. Not only did you hide the fact that you lost your job and fell in love with someone else, you opened my eyes. And I'm grateful for that. Even ready to the plane ticket. Add the amount for rent for a month. Consider it compensation for not making a scandal at the breakup. But that's it. Let your lover support you now. Bye, guys." He got up from the table and headed for the exit. "Have a nice stay." "Robert, where are you going?" David asked him. "To a place where I am truly loved, not for money, just because I am me." The young man got into the car. All the way he smiled, imagining that soon he would hug his beloved. "Robert?" Emily jumped out into the street, noticing the familiar car. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," he answered simply. "What about your wedding?" The girl asked confusedly. "There will be one. You will marry me, won't you?" He took out of his pocket a ring of white and yellow gold, decorated with small diamonds, and put it on her finger. "It's only thanks to you that I realized what true love is. What about your fiancée? She's flying to her lover's house the other day. I'm not even angry with her because I never loved her. I got used to her. She was always there, bright, beautiful, but her beauty was false. You taught me to see a different kind of beauty, a soulful beauty. With you, it's like I've been cured of a serious illness. And now I stand before you and ask you to be my wife. Do you accept?" "Yes, I do. I love you." Emily threw herself on his neck, hugged him, and there was no need to hide her feelings. She looked at her chosen one with happy eyes. "I love you." Robert leaned down and kissed the girl. Jenna looked at them from the window and smiled. The elderly woman crossed the young couple 3 times and whispered softly, "God bless."